I call to order the workshop of November 19th, 2018. First item on the agenda is a presentation by the State of Maine economist, Amanda Rector. Mrs. Rector, thank you very much for being here today. I'm going to turn it over to you and give us a state of the state, so to speak, update on our economic outlook.
All right, terrific. Thank you very much for having me here this evening. I appreciate it very much. I'm going to give you, I think, a little bit of a multi-stage overview here. So I'm going to talk about demographics, probably a fair amount about demographics, and then a little about employment and GDP, wages and income, and then a few other indicators that are good to look at and keep in mind as you're looking at economic progress going forward. So demographics, first and foremost. Keep in mind that some of these are very high level and often get revised over time. So I'm going to start with just the very high level look of Maine and a few key demographic factors here. The 2017 population estimate for Maine, 1,335,907. I know that sounds very precise. It's really rough estimate. That's the 42nd largest state in the U.S. Our population change from 2010 to 2017 was an increase of 0.6%. I know that doesn't sound like a lot. I got really excited when I saw that, though, because that's an improvement over what we have been seeing earlier in the decade. That is 45th in the U.S., and that moved us up a couple rankings when we saw the most recent population estimates. So we're ahead of West Virginia, Vermont, Illinois, Connecticut, Mississippi. So a couple of our other New England neighbors are in that same slow population growth group. Median age in 2017, 44.7 years. I'm sure everybody knows that's the oldest in the U.S. That's a statistic that's frequently shared and talked about. We've been the oldest by that measure for a few years now. And our population is 93.3% white non-Hispanic. That is the highest percent in the U.S. Vermont comes in second. Looking more specifically at Androscoggin County and then Auburn, I've tried to include some of these lower geographies as much as I can. They don't necessarily have data for county or city level at all of these different data points, but where I have it, I've tried to include it for you. So Androscoggin County, the 2017 population estimate, 107,651, the 5th largest county in the state. Auburn itself, the 2017 population estimate was 23,033. Interestingly enough, that was the 5th largest city. So the 5th largest city and in the 5th largest county in the state. Population change, Androscoggin County, 0. 7th in Maine, though. There were some counties that have seen population declines, others that saw a little bit more population growth. Auburn itself, minus 0.1%. I would say, keep in mind that these are, rough estimates. The further we get from the decennial census, the more of an estimate they are. So that could potentially change, particularly as we get to the 2020, and we'll get a new decennial census count in a few years. 2017 median age of Androscoggin County, 41 years. That's the youngest in Maine. And Auburn, different data source for that measure, but a median age estimate, 39.3 years. That's looking at the American Community Survey 5-year estimates. So a little bit younger than that. And that puts Auburn in sort of the top 40 in terms of the youngest municipalities in the state. Androscoggin County, 92.5% white non-Hispanic. That's the 3rd lowest in Maine. And then Auburn is 97% white non-Hispanic. So a little bit more diverse population here, a little bit younger population here. If you look at the median age, here's the line that goes across there is the Maine statewide median average, 44.7 years. You can see there are 4 counties that have median age below the state average. Androscoggin being the youngest, as I said earlier. And then Cumberland, Penobscot, and Kennebec just squeaked in below that line. Those 4, of course, have what we consider urban areas, at least for Maine, so Portland and Bangor, Augusta, Lewiston, Auburn. And then they also have college populations, so that helps bring the median age down a bit too when you have a large contingent of college-age students all living in your area as well. And certainly there are a couple of counties that are well above the median average. You'll see that Lincoln and Piscataquis are the 2 oldest. Piscataquis has taken the crown from Lincoln in recent years. Lincoln had been the oldest for some time, and they've now moved to place. So if you look at the components of population change, you remember I said earlier that we've had this slow population growth, but it picked up a little bit in the most recent couple of years. This is made up entirely of migration. So there's a lot going on in this chart. The red bars that are in negative territory are the number of deaths each year. The dark green is the number of births each year. We have more deaths than births in Maine. We reached that point earlier in the decade, and it really is a reflection of the fact that we have this older population. We have a lot of baby boomers in our population, and so they are beyond their childbearing years, and so no longer producing births and inching ever closer to some of the older cohorts where death rates start to increase. And so you see the number of births is declining over time, the number of deaths has been increasing. So we're not growing our population naturally, so we need to import people from other places. So that's where all of the population growth is coming from. You'll see sort of a light green section, that's international migration. It's not a huge number, but it's consistent and it's positive. So we get sort of a small contingent from international migration every year. And then there's this blue section, which a couple years earlier in the decade was actually negative. And then 2016 was a little bit more positive, and then 2017 considerably more positive. And that's domestic migration. So that's people who are moving to Maine from other parts of the US. And so we finally saw this increase the past couple of years, which really led to the population increases that we saw more recently. So I have been working on updating my population projections. We haven't released them in sort of a final format yet, but I have some preliminary figures that I've included in here, just because my previous ones were getting very out of date, and I have finished at least this portion of the projection. So looking forward 20 years, you'll notice that, so these light blue bars are the US projections. Those come from the Census Bureau. If you look all the way over to the right first, you'll see that that's the total, sort of over that 20-year period, population change. US is expected to see reasonable population growth. Maine and Androscoggin County, not so much. A little bit positive, which is an improvement over my previous set of projections that reflects the better population growth that we've seen the past year up through 2016. 2017 isn't included in those yet. But if you look back through the age cohorts, there are these very, very tall bars just to the left of the total. And that, of course, is the older age cohorts. And some of those are going to see extraordinarily large population increases over the next couple of decades. And that's because the baby boomers are aging into those cohorts. So if you look at 80 to 84-year-olds, for example, Maine and the US are both in about 110% increases for those age cohorts. That's just tremendous. And that's a combination of course, life expectancies have increased over time, but then we have all of these baby boomers who are aging into those cohorts. Growth rates for Androscoggin County are a little bit lower at those highest cohorts, a little bit higher for sort of the 75 to 79, just a reflection of a slightly different population mix in the county. The problem comes in when you look at, so you'll look at the, when the baby boomers were in 2016, 52 to 70 years. They age out of those cohorts, and you see big population declines in those years to go with the aging into the 72 to 90 years in 2036. If you look further back, you've got actually some positive growth throughout all of the different geographies in sort of the early 30s to early 40s, which is a good sign. I mean, some of that in Maine is a reflection of the most recent population migration by age that we've seen, where it has been 25 to 29 and 30 to 34, the age cohorts that we're seeing more in migration. And then if you look at the youngest age cohorts, that's where things get particularly concerning, because those are, for Maine and Androscoggin County, negative. The U.S. has a little bit of growth in those. And that's just a reflection of the fact that our population is made up of such a large cohort of the baby boomers. We just don't have the population of young adults and younger at this stage that would be producing offspring to have those children in the coming years. Now, that said, population projections are based on recent trends. So as the trends change, hopefully for the positive, the projections change. And so they get updated at this point every 2 years, maybe more frequently if it seems like that's a worthwhile endeavor. But certainly a lot to keep in mind with the changing trends. Those population projections will change as the trends change. Of course, this worries us because we think about workforce and we think about, are we going to have workers down the line? So this is a chart that comes directly from the Maine Department of Labor. This was from their Employment Outlook to 2026. So if you look at the bars, those represent the population change over that decade. And of course, you'll see big increase in the 65 plus, that's the baby boomers aging into that cohort. Decline in the 45 to 54 as the baby boomers age out of that cohort. And then most of the other cohorts have slight decreases, with the exception of the 25 to 34 cohort that I mentioned earlier. Of course, the labor force participation rates for 45 to 54-year-olds are quite a bit higher than the labor force participation rates for 65 plus. So we're seeing a loss of population at a very high labor force participation rate and a gain in population at a very low labor force participation rate. Now, of course, 65 plus encompasses a broad range of ages, and there are a lot of 65-year-olds who are still working, fewer 85-year-olds who are working. So the labor force participation rates across that cohort differ a little bit, but they do drop off pretty dramatically.
So, Ms. Rector, this is just 10 years.
It is just 10 years. And again, these are projections that are based on recent trends. They update these every 2 years as well. So you could expect that if the trends continue to improve, as we've seen the past couple of years, these might become slightly less dire down the line. So employment and GDP. One of the things that I think everybody is experiencing right now is, because we have this strong economy paired with this aging population and slow-growing population, we're at a point where unemployment rates are exceptionally low. This includes data for the U.S., the New England average excluding Maine, so the average of the other New England states, the state of Maine, and then the Lewiston-Auburn MSA, which is Androscoggin County. And you'll see that all of these have come down dramatically since the post-recession, during the post-recession period. If this extended out further, you'd see that Maine has actually hit all-time lows. The Lewiston-Auburn MSA, this is sort of the extent of the data that I have for that geography, certainly hit an all-time low for that time period. The U.S. and New England are around the same point as well. New England's not quite to their all-time low, but certainly headed there. And this is, as I said, is a combination of the very, very tight labor market that we're facing right now and the very strong economy. People have been looking to hire. It's brought a lot of people back into the labor force, but we just are running out of warm bodies to put into jobs. And so the unemployment rate has gotten lower and lower as we've progressed.
Mrs. Rector, if you could please, could you, on that graph?
Yes.
I mean, I'm just trying to tie something together. It looks like every time we hit a low unemployment rate, we enter into a recession. And then it spikes back up. Yeah, it gets better and better, overheats, and then it just, see, I'm just looking back to, 1989, 91, that recession there, post 9/11, 2001, post crash 2008. Is that a safe assumption? Is that an indicator of we might be heading towards that?
There's been a lot of discussion recently about how close are we to a recession. Opinions vary. I mean, certainly there will be a recession at some point. We don't know exactly when. If I knew exactly when, I would make lots of money by it. But certainly the signs are that at least the U.S. economy at this point still seems to be functioning very well, and so it seems like perhaps we're not that close yet. Globally, maybe there are some other signs of concern, but I would say that there are certainly a lot of people who are sort of paying close attention to all of the different indicators that go into figuring out when a recession might hit. And certainly the sort of most recent estimates that I've seen gauge sort of a 2020, maybe second half of 2020, but certainly it's a guess. There are many different things that could set off a recession, but we're not seeing any sort of big red warning signs at this point. So there are a number of different ways to measure unemployment. The U3 is the sort of official unemployment rate. That was what was in the previous chart. There are some broader measures of underemployment. If you look at all of the different measures of unemployment and underemployment, all of those hit series lows in 2017. So this is a very widespread indication of a tight labor market, where it's not just the unemployment rate that's low, but discouraged workers, marginally attached workers, part-time for economic reasons, all of those have hit record lows in 2017. In terms of the employment forecast, this comes from the state's Consensus Economic Forecasting Commission. It's a group of 5 independent economists. They meet a couple times a year to update their economic forecast for the state. That economic forecast is then used by the Revenue Forecasting Committee to set the revenue forecast for the state, which in turn sets the state budget. So this is the first step in that process. They met at the end of October and have a new November 1st report, so this is a recent forecast from them. You can see that we had the pre-recession peak back in 2007, 617,700 total non-farm employment. We very gradually clawed our way back and hit a new record high in 2017, 622,800. While the CEFC was meeting during the recovery period, there were points when they actually didn't think that we would make it back to that pre-recession employment level. They've spent a lot of time looking at our demographics, and they didn't know how we were going to get back to that point with the demographic mix that we have. Clearly we did, and then after the fact we got the data that we've had more in-migration and stronger population growth. So clear indication that we're seeing this employment growth sustained through more people moving into the state. That's a good sign. People are seeing that there's economic opportunity here, there are job opportunities, and so moving in to take advantage of those. So the most recent forecast has a few more years of employment growth, and then it sort of flatlines at 631,700. They've been moving this 0% growth line up each time they meet, as we sort of exceed a new level of employment, they move that line up. My hope is that that continues to happen. I mean, barring whatever recession we might see in the future, the reasoning for moving that up is that we've seen more in-migration, but at some point it's going to be very, very hard to sort of exceed the growth that we would need to offset the retiring baby boomers. So at some point they see this becoming too much to overcome. So if we can continue to increase migration in the coming years, then we can sort of overcome the retirements of the baby boomers and continue to see employment growth. But without that, it's going to be very, very difficult to see employment growth continuing on. If you look at how things have changed over time, certainly there has been a long trend where the manufacturing employment has declined. This chart goes back to 1990 and goes through 2017 with annual figures. So just highlighting three key sectors for the state: manufacturing, education and health services, which is primarily health services, and then professional and business services. It used to be that manufacturing was the largest of those three, followed by education and health services, and then professional and business services. Over time, manufacturing employment has been declining, while the other two sectors have seen employment increases. So education and health services is now the largest, followed by professional and business services, and then manufacturing. If you look at employment and GDP by industry, and there's a lot going on in this chart, I apologize for that. I was trying to fit a lot of data into a single slide. So the two dark-colored bars are employment, the two light-colored bars are GDP, and this is the share of the total by industry. And then blue is Maine and green is Lewiston Auburn. So if you look across some of these industries, in some cases, everybody's sort of at about the same level: mining and logging and construction, which is mostly construction, about 5% employment and GDP in both geographies. Manufacturing, a little bit more of a presence in the Lewiston Auburn MSA than in the state as a whole. Financial activities is an interesting one. That includes rent, and so GDP it's a much higher share of Maine's GDP than employment. There's not a lot of employment in that sector, but it makes up a large portion of GDP, more in Maine than in Lewiston Auburn. If you look at education and health services, more employment than GDP, but again, Lewiston Auburn has a much higher concentration in that industry than in the state as a whole. A little bit lower on the leisure and hospitality side and the government side than for Maine as a whole, and a little bit stronger in terms of professional and business services. If you look at...
I'm sorry, just a small question on the previous slide. When you say financial services...
Financial activities?
Yeah, financial activities.
So that includes things that you would sort of normally think of as financial activities, like banking, but it also includes real estate, which includes a component that estimates the rent that people pay. Okay. So it's a little bit misleading. It's not sort of what you would necessarily think of as financial activities. It has built into it some other components that cause that to be a much larger share of GDP.
Thank you.
If you look at Maine's GDP by industry, this is adjusted for inflation. If you look at it over time, you can see some different trends emerge. Construction has not really recovered from the recession, it sort of declined and hasn't really come back. Manufacturing in the past couple of years has actually seen a little bit of an increase. That's fairly unusual, but it's different for GDP than employment. While employment has seen sort of a steady decline, there's been a trade-off for sort of more productive types of manufacturing. So still a fairly large contributor to GDP while having lower employment in that sector. Trade, which is mostly retail trade, large piece of Maine's economy, reflecting in part the strong tourism economy in a lot of the state, has recovered almost back up to where we were pre-recession. If you look at finance, insurance, and real estate, that has increased dramatically over the years. It's sort of slowed the rate of growth recently. Professional and business services has really taken off, though. That has been a strong growth sector. And again, educational services and healthcare, being mostly healthcare, has been increasing. That rate of growth has slowed a little bit, but certainly with our demographics, we expect that that will continue to be a growing part of Maine's economy going forward. If you look at the share of GDP by metro area, the Portland, South Portland MSA, which is a little misleading because it includes all of York, Cumberland, and Saginaw counties. So it's a large population, a large geographic area, makes up about half. It used to be, 2001, it was a little less than half. 2017, it's a little bit more than half. The Lewiston-Auburn MSA, which again is Androscoggin County, is held pretty steady at about 7%. The Bangor MSA, again, pretty steady at around 10%. So the growth in the Portland, South Portland MSA has sort of come at the expense of the non-MSA portion of the state, which is the counties that are not the ones that are part of the MSA. So there's been certainly growth in the greater Portland area, that as that has become a larger share of the state's GDP, the non-metropolitan portions of the state have seen their share sort of eroded over time. So a little bit of an uneven growth in terms of GDP across the state. If we look at wages and income, this is another chart with a forecast from the Consensus Economic Forecasting Commission. Total personal income, and then wages and salaries. Wages and salaries are the largest component of total personal income. We've seen some pretty good growth in recent years. 2015, of course, we saw good growth, and there was essentially zero inflation. So all of the growth we saw was real growth. A couple more years are forecast of reasonable growth, and then sort of trailing off. That trailing off in the growth rates is a reflection of the lack of employment growth. One of the primary ways that you grow your wages and salaries and your total personal income is by adding more people to the workforce and expanding the number of jobs you have. And so without that growth, you're left with sort of the growth that comes out of the raises that people get, wage increases, and whatever sort of aging into more advanced salaries. So as somebody progresses through their job, in general, wages and salaries increase throughout your career. And so that sort of is built into that as well. But certainly that trailing off is a reflection of both the demographic situation and then the lack of employment growth that they see going forward. I mentioned that wages and salaries are the largest component of personal income. That holds true for the state and for some counties. That is not actually true across the board. This is sort of an interesting way to see demographics at work. As you progress through your life, clearly you have income coming from different sources. So during your working years, wages and salaries are generally the largest component. However, once you hit retirement, usually you're getting more income from other sources. So that might be Social Security, it might be capital gains, it might be other retirement. And the largest component is maybe not wages and salaries if you have a large share of retirees in your population. So if you look at Maine, which is all the way down at the bottom of the chart, 43.6% of personal income comes from wages and salaries, 20.7% comes from personal current transfer receipts, which, unless you sort of spend a lot of time with this, makes absolutely no sense at all. But transfer receipts include any payments that get transferred from a government to an individual. So that includes Social Security, it includes Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment is a small portion of that. Really, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are the three biggest pieces of that. Dividends, interest, and rent, a little more self-explanatory. Supplements to wages and salaries are essentially the benefits package that go along with your wages and salary. And then proprietor's income. So 17.6% dividends, interest, and rent for the state, 10.8% supplements, and then 7.3% proprietor's income. If you look at Cumberland County, 51.1% wages and salaries, much smaller portions of personal current transfer receipts, and then about the same for dividends, supplements, and proprietor's income. Androscoggin County is similar, 47.2% wages and salaries, 24.2% transfer receipts. Dividends, interest, and rent is a little bit lower, only 12.6%. 11.3% supplements, and then 4.8% proprietor's income. If you look at Lincoln and Piscataquis County, remember I said those are the two oldest counties. So Lincoln County, only 28.5% comes from wages and salaries, 24.6% comes from personal current transfer receipts, 29.5% comes from dividends, interest, and rent. So the largest component of personal income in Lincoln County is actually dividends, interest, and rent. You have a lot of retirees, and in Lincoln County you tend to have a lot of wealthy retirees. So they have income sources beyond just Social Security. Piscataquis County, also old county, but has a lower income population. So 32.8% coming from wages and salaries, but 33.6% coming from transfer receipts. So that's the largest component of personal income for Piscataquis County. So you can sort of look to the personal income components to see a reflection of the demographics in the particular area. If we look at household income and benefits, this is a different sort of view. This is, rather than looking at the total picture for the geography, this is looking at the household level. I have two different time frames in here. So it's sort of, I was trying to fit everything onto one chart again, and maybe should have been two charts because there's a lot going on. But the three sort of bluish purple lines all come from the 2017 American Community Survey one-year estimates. So that's US is the light blue, New England is purple, and then Maine is the dark blue. And the thing to look at there is that while Maine certainly has a lower median income than the US and New England, it really is because we don't have a large share of the very wealthy households. So if you look all the way over, look at the 150 to 199 to, and then the 200,000 plus, the US and New England, particularly New England, have a much larger share of households at those income levels. If you look at the green bars, Androscoggin County and Auburn, these are coming from the 2016 American Community Survey 5-year estimates. We don't have the 2017 5-year estimates yet. They'll be out next month. But a similar sort of structure to Maine, a little bit more in terms of the lower income, the 15,000 to 25,000 range, has a larger percentage both in Androscoggin County and in Auburn. And then, interestingly, the 50 to 75,000, Maine and Androscoggin County and Auburn all are sort of higher than the US and New England, so larger in sort of that middle income range, and then again trailing off as we get to the highest income levels. If we look at a few other indicators, I just skipped one. I apologize. So the percent of population that is age 25 plus with a bachelor's degree or higher, and I appear to have lost my years for these. So the first set of bars are 1990. The second set are 2000. The third are from 2012, and the fourth are from 2017. I don't know what happened to my dates there, but trying to give you a look at what's happening over time. We've seen the percent of the population that has a bachelor's degree or higher increase over time across Maine, across Androscoggin County, and for Auburn. And certainly there are some margins of error attached to these that I haven't included in here, so it might be a little higher, might be a little lower. But for Maine and Auburn in particular, the most recent data set, the 2017 data, or 2016 5-year for Auburn and Androscoggin County, which is all the way over to the right, has been very positive. If you look at Maine, we've actually exceeded the U.S. now. We had been trailing for a very long time. And Auburn really is right there as well. So we've seen some good increases in the most recent time period. And that continues if you look at the percent of the population with a graduate or professional degree. I was very excited when I saw these figures, particularly for Maine, and my dates are back in this one, so you know what time period I'm talking about now. The 2017 bars, you can see that Maine has, it looks like we're below the U.S. It's within a statistical margin of error so that it's not statistically different. So we've essentially caught up to the U.S. in this measure as well. And again, Auburn is right there on this measure. So the last piece of the educational tables that I wanted to share is the percent of the population with some college and no degree. This is one of the cohorts that we're sort of looking at as a potential workforce pool. Clearly, we want to make sure that the workers that we have are all as engaged as possible. And so one of the pools of workers who may be potentially underemployed and could come into some more skills-rich environments are these some college, no degree. And so this is a group that's being targeted, I know, by some of the different educational programs that are going on. And that, it's around 20%, a little bit lower in Auburn. It's actually come down from the 2012 figures for Auburn, down a bit below Maine in the U.S. and Androscoggin County. But still, we're talking, you know, around 20% of the population. So this is a population we can look to as one of the groups that we want to make sure is fully engaged in the workforce going forward. Retail sales, this is sort of the early summer period. September has become a very, very large tourism month, and so this doesn't quite fully capture the peak of the tourism season. But you can see that we've had some very good retail sales lately, and that those taxable retail sales figures have been positive and strongly positive for some time now, which has been very encouraging. Excuse me. Other retail seen tremendous increases. I'm not entirely sure of why that's the case. I've talked to the folks at Maine Revenue Services about this. Auto transportation as well, very, very strong. But if you look at the total, not just for the August time period, but also for the 3-month period, very, very strong across the board, 7% August to August, 5% for the 3-month rolling period. Heating oil. My furnace died Saturday morning. That was a fun experience. Now that we're right into heating oil season, certainly the price of, excuse me, the price of heating oil is something that has an impact on the taxable retail sales figures we saw earlier. If you're spending a lot of money on heating oil, you don't have a lot of money to spend on other things. We've seen the price creep up a little bit over the past year. It had been trending quite a bit lower. We still have the 2013-14 data in here, so you can see where that really high period was. We had a few seasons that were up at that point. Crude oil prices have come down a little bit more recently, so hopefully heating oil will follow that trend as well. Looks like maybe 14, 15 is a good season to think about, at least at this point in time, in terms of the trend that we're following. But one of the reasons that heating oil is so important is that we have the largest percent of homes that rely on fuel oil as the primary heating fuel in the nation. Excuse me. So if you look at the bar all the way to the left, that's the United States. The very, very skinny bar at the top is housing units using wood as their primary heating fuel. Small purple section is fuel oil. The next larger green section is electricity. The red section is bottled tank or LP gas. And then the blue section is utility gas, so that's natural gas that's piped right to your house. If you look at Maine, it looks a little different. We have a larger section that is heating with wood, and then a huge section that is purple. That's the fuel oil. That's the largest in the US, and then if you look at New Hampshire and Vermont, that's second and third. We're quite a bit ahead of both of those as well. Then if you look a little bit further down, in terms of utility gas, we have a very, very small portion of households that have access to utility gas. A little bit more in New Hampshire and Vermont, which is making up some of the difference in terms of the reduction in the fuel oil usage there. It's a little bit higher in Androscoggin County and in Auburn, a little more access to natural gas in this area. But certainly that heavy reliance on fuel oil means that when heating oil prices go up, it becomes very, very expensive for everyone, and we have less money to spend on other parts of the economy. Certainly we also do a lot of driving. We don't have a lot of very robust public transportation systems, and everybody lives a long distance apart. And so gasoline prices also have a big impact on what the resulting retail sales look like. So one of the indicators that we follow very closely are the energy prices, because those do have a large impact on Maine's economy specifically, more so than sort of the US as a whole. So that was a bunch of different slides, and I wrapped up with sort of an array of different indicators that are a little bit piecemeal. Certainly I'm happy to take questions. This is my contact information if you have questions down the line. But I do think, by and large, at this point, we seem to be seeing good economic growth. We've seen some improvements in demographics recently. Population growth has picked up a little bit. Migration has picked up a little bit. While we do know that there will be a recession at some point in the future, it doesn't seem like it's immediately impending. But certainly we keep track of a lot of different indicators to try to make sure that we can keep ahead of whatever changes might happen.
And thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
No, and thank you for coming out here. I know it's, as we start thinking about growth and policy decisions for the city, we want to make sure we're looking at the right things that are going to have the most impact. And I'll have one question. I know we're running out of time, and we can always follow up with you later, and we'd love to keep picking your brain and your staff's brain too. But if there's a couple things, 2 or 3 things, that you would recommend us focusing on in order to keep Auburn on the right path, if you would, or a stronger path, what would those things be? What would those topics be?
Yeah, I
can't control heating oil.
Right. I think that unfortunately there's sort of no one thing that I can point to. I wish there were. It would make my life a lot easier if I could just go to everybody and say, this is what you need to fix, and then we'll all be good. I think it's important to keep in mind that you need to work on both sides of the equation at the same time. So for a lot of communities, and certainly for the state as a whole, the workforce issue and the demographic situation is sort of the single most pressing issue at the time. Everybody's worried now about, where am I going to find workers? Am I going to have somebody to sell my business to when I want to retire? Are we going to have students in our schools? Are we going to have teachers? Are we going to have nurses to support the older population? So it's important to keep in mind that we need to think about how do we attract people here. Part of it is letting them know that there are opportunities here. I think for a long time the story has been, oh, there's nothing going on in Maine, you don't want to move there. That is not the case at the moment. For sure, there is a lot going on, and we need people to move here. So letting people know that there are opportunities here and making sure that there are policies in place that make Maine a place for them to make a good living and get a house or an apartment and can raise a family and find childcare, find affordable childcare, all of those different things. At the same time, we can't ignore the businesses, and we have to make sure that businesses are able to connect with the workers that they need and are able to find a path forward that is sustainable for them as well. You really need to have both pieces. If you have workers and no businesses, then everybody's going to move away. If you have businesses and no workers, those businesses are going to move away because they are looking for a place to grow where they know that they're going to have a workforce going forward, and they're going to be able to stay in business and find prosperity for themselves down the line as well. So it is a lot of different puzzle pieces that you sort of have to figure out all at the same time. I think we tend to sometimes focus on one thing or one side of the equation, and really it's this team effort. I think that public-private partnerships are a great way to work on a lot of these issues. I think that the more that we can take advantage of those, the better. I think a lot of businesses are now in the situation where they are realizing that this is really an issue, and so they're actively looking for ways to be engaged in this as well.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Is there any other quick questions for Mrs. Rector before we wrap up?
More of a comment. It would be really great to get an executive summary of this. Just even, the mayor asked a question, but for people who aren't data people, and for us to be able, when we talk to constituents about what's going on, whether it's a page or 2-page of bullet points, kind of in a narrative, not a lot of detail necessarily, but I think that would be helpful for us to be able to communicate this information effectively.
Yeah, that's helpful to know, because certainly we have a website and we're always looking for things that we can put up there that are making the data more helpful to people. So I appreciate that. I'll take that idea back to the office.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Rector. I appreciate your taking the time to come down here.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Good. Enjoy your trip and your stay in Auburn. Please go to our local restaurants, spend money.
Thank you.
Put it on the state credit card, if such a thing exists. Next on our agenda, we're going to move over to Assistant City Manager, Mr. Phil Kroll, who's going to give us a very brief update on the marijuana moratorium.
Great. Thank you, Mayor, Council. As you all are aware, you passed a moratorium effective May 31st, 2018. Within that ordinance that we passed, there was a section within there, paragraph 3, that will allow for the council to extend the moratorium. Not only that, but Title 30A, subsection 4356 of the state statute allows for us to extend a moratorium for 180 days if we can demonstrate that reasonable progress is being made to alleviate the problem that rose to the need for the moratorium. So we have been making great progress. The committee is in the final stretch of making a recommendation. I provided you a timeline on what I believe will take place. These are tentative, but we hope to have the extension of the 180 days, which is allowed by state law tonight. The ordinance that you adopted would expire November 27th, which is why we're extending it the 180 days. The work group will meet again on December 4th to complete the draft ordinance. We'll submit it to the planning board for review January 8th. February 5th, the work group will come back together and make any changes, last minute changes from the planning board or other work that we've been identified. And then on February 5th, we hope for the work group to, we'll draft the final appearance, and then February 18th, we'll present that to the ordinance to the City Council in a workshop, and then March 4th and 18th will be the public hearing, first and second reading, and then the extension of the moratorium that you're going to hopefully pass this evening will bring us to May 26, which gives us plenty of time if there's anything that comes up that we've identified, or anything that the state identifies as they start working on the state rules and regulations that we feel we need to bring back into this. So we have some time there to also pause.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Kroll. Any questions from the council? It was pretty straightforward. Need a little bit more time. Councilor Titus, you sit on the working group. Any comment you'd like to make on your end?
No, except that I think that we've made great strides, and we're very close to having something to present. So this moratorium now, I had one question though, was if we want to, does it have to go to the end of the 180 days, or if we find out we get things the way we want to, will we have to vote again to dispose of it, or will the ordinance replace the
ordinance will put that within the language. What it will do is it'll replace the language that allows for the moratorium.
Right, so then it'll stop then either on May 26th or when the ordinance is passed, whichever is greater. So, yep. No, I'm very enthused with what we've got. So you folks, I think, will like what the committee will bring out.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. This obviously is going to be on our agenda later on this evening. So if there's anything that pops up in our mind between now and then, we can discuss it then. Thank you very much, Mr. Assistant Manager. Okay, we're going to move along to reallocation of bond money. We've got a presentation and request from our esteemed guru of money, Jill Eastman.
During last budget season, or this current year's budget deliberations, the council approved $150,000 for Auburn's portion for a tractor for the Auburn Lewiston Airport. The actual cost of the tractor, they got a really good bid, and it came in at $239,000, which leaves a surplus of $61,000. What the airport board voted on at their last meeting was to go to the two councils and ask to reallocate that money to use it, actually $52,000 of the $61,000, which is $26,000 from each city, to purchase a V-plow for one of their trucks that they have, and a smaller tractor that will do sidewalks, parking lot, and some of the around. It's a mower and a plow. It will also be able to mow along the fence lines, which with their big tractor they can't do. The board unanimously voted to bring that to the councils. The city of Lewiston had a workshop on it last week. They had a special workshop, and they'll be voting on this tomorrow night at their regular meeting. We're not going to ask you to vote on this until our next council meeting, since we didn't have a chance to have a workshop before that. This money, there's no impact to our budget for this. And then the balance of that money left over, which is not a lot, but $9,000, will come back. It's $4,500 for each city. Will come back to the city of Auburn, and it will go into our unallocated bond money that will be used for other stuff in this coming budget. I would be happy to answer questions if you have any. I also prepared the order so you could look at that and see what it says. And the only way this can pass is if both cities pass this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eastman. I think I'd like to direct a question, if I could, to Councilor Hayes on this. Well, and maybe to Ms. Eastman as well. I've negotiated a lot of prices for things, done a lot of budgets over the years, and I can't remember budgeting for a capital good, the capital expenditure, and having the actual cost come in 20% lower than what we budgeted. I mean, that's either some significantly awesome negotiations by, the kingmaker of deals himself, or it just smells a little just odd, and almost to the point where you get it passed, you get the money for something, and you're going to have a lot left over that we can just kind of slide in halfway through the fiscal year and get something else. Maybe that's not a question, but I mean, is this normal? Do you see this as, and I wouldn't say just the airport, but just in general in your procurement policy, 20% under?
It depends. It depends. We've had it go both ways, especially like with Public Works, their equipment. They'll get quotes once they put all the specs together. Sometimes it comes in under, sometimes it comes in over. Rick said that, I guess John, and one of his men was there also, that actually would be using this piece of equipment. And his explanation to us was that John Deere has got some promotions going on, and that's why it came in as low as it did, because they had called and gotten estimates prior to the budget last year, and they asked for the amount of money that they were told it was going to cost. So I don't think there's anything.
And that, I would like if we could possibly get copies of that documentation. And Councilor Hayes, you might have seen that already. Did you see that in the last airport board meeting?
We didn't look at the actual numbers, no, but the same explanation I heard. And I think the other difference is that through Public Works, they're looking at purchasing equipment on a pretty regular basis. I think this was a big piece of equipment that the airport doesn't normally have in its budget. So it might come up every 15, 20 years. So I think that it was, we probably did, accept some numbers that probably would have been higher had we, if we'd been in the business year after year, might have recognized that it could be less. But I think based upon, again, just going out and asking different manufacturers for this type of equipment, that's what we went with.
Very good, thank you. Any other councilors? Councilor Gary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Jill, in their 5-year capital improvement plan, is this requested use of the bond money in that future plan?
Yes, I believe it was.
So in other words, if we allocate it, then potentially their CIP request for this coming year could potentially be lower.
Yes.
So that would almost sell the case to approve it, if their CIP would come in lower in the next budget, since we were trying to save taxpayers' dollars.
Yes. Councilor Chavez?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I, too, kind of wonder the way you do. I like the idea that they spent less money than they thought, but I really don't like this half year or into the year changes and spending. It's an annual thing to do that capital improvement budget, CIP budget, and they should do it once a year. And if they spend less, well, that gets reallocated next year with a new budget process, and the whole thing starts over again. So I really, just because there's some found money, I don't believe we should just spend it. I mean, maybe it would be available. Would that be available to them next year when we have unallocated bond funds that could be used for that next year after they present their CIP for next year?
It could be in their CIP next year.
If the equipment's already there, then we're going to see it probably, but then there's some unallocated funds that could be applied to that, so they wouldn't have to be.
Well, if we don't authorize this, then it will go into the pool for unallocated.
And the city could, yeah.
And it can be used. Normally, what I do is when we get the requests, I pick and choose which I think should go to the unallocated.
And we can use that to apply towards their next year's CIP if we wanted to.
We could.
So, I mean, the idea of just coming up with, hey, let's do this now because we had a savings, it does bother me a little, but I think we need to have annual budgets and we need to stick to them as much as possible.
If we could, and thank you very much for bringing this to us in a workshop prior to voting on this. If we could, before the next council meeting and before this is on the agenda to vote, could we get a copy of the initial proposals for the equipment pre-authorization of the CIP, and then the final quote on the actual John Deere, as well as a copy, and maybe Mr. Manager, you have this as well, just a copy of the airport's 5-year CIP highlighting where this piece of equipment was listed for procurement between next year and later. If we can have those two bits of information, I think that will make sense too, especially if this tractor showed up on next year's request, CIP request from the airport, then at least we know they're not just fabricating something because they have extra money, saying, well, hey, we got some extra, piggy bank money, let's go buy a tractor. I think that would make us feel a little bit better on that vote. Council agreed?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Councilor Gary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The only other reason I suggested doing it, saving money, was the fact if the prices were lower for that big piece of equipment, these pieces of equipment they're wanting to get now could be also part of that same cost-saving sale. And I'm just afraid if we wait till the next budget cycle, then the prices of these equipment pieces could go up. That's the only other flip of the coin that I would like to see us consider. If it's something that we're trying to do if there's an off chance that this, like everything goes up the longer you wait.
Very good. Well, sorry, Councilor Hayes, you had something?
I think that's a good point, and we're talking John Deere, and the smaller tractor we're talking about would be coming from John Deere too, as far as the quote that we received. I think the V-plow, we're into the season where that's needed, and I think that for efficiency's sake and keeping the airport open, that becomes a necessary piece of equipment. So I think that for both reasons, I think probably the cost would be less this year, and I think because of the efficiency of that V-plow being used this year would be very helpful.
Well, let's get into the debates on the pros and cons and the merits during our next council meeting where it's actually on the agenda, and we have the information we requested. I'm not disagreeing with anything anyone's saying, but let's postpone that debate till next week or next meeting. Fair enough? Okay. Let's move on our agenda if we could, please. Thank you very much, Mrs. Eastman. Overview, TIFs and credit enhancement. As our Director of Economic Development, Mr. Chamings, gets settled in, I just want to remind you, last meeting, I think it's last week, we had a vote on a TIF and credit enhancement for Schooner Estates in Auburn. We had a lot of questions then. We did discuss the fact that as a council, it's not a bad idea to have a couple minutes of education over a period of time on the differences between TIFs and credit enhancements as a starting point. Now, Mr. Chamings, I know you presented a very thorough, and I looked through it, I think we all have a hard copy of it, of a very detailed explanation of tax increment financing and credit enhancements. And if I could, just for timing's sake, if we could just chunk this conversation out into a couple more manageable topics, and just about 5 to 10 minutes each, that would be really great. I think from an absorption standpoint, 10 minutes on a very complicated topic is a lot to absorb. So if you're okay with that and you agree, I'll turn it off to you. It's your presentation, of course.
Yeah, sure. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. What I would like to do is, I know the time's limited, and we will be coming back in the near future to work on a TIF policy, to update our TIF policy, which we think is important because we don't want to get our TIFs and our credit enhancement agreements getting into the entitlement mentality, which we haven't been doing. So where we stand right now, you have a package in front of you. I'm not going to go through all that, obviously, but the backup material, you have a list from the state of Maine with all of the state of Maine's current TIFs, which are about 400 of them. And when you go through them, you'll see every major city and service center has TIFs in there, various terms. And if you look to the far right, it says CEA, Credit Enhancement Agreement. They break down yes and no, which ones have credit enhancement agreements. So to be clear, a tax increment finance is usually used for public infrastructure. And then we break out credit enhancement agreements. The credit enhancement agreements, the city has sole discretion on whether any funds are returned to the company utilizing a credit enhancement agreement when a TIF district is created. Tax revenue generated in TIF districts may be dedicated solely to public infrastructure improvements. They do not need to go to any individual firms. When we do use them, it is our only economic tool we have to compete globally, nationally, and locally. And Maine does not have a lot of tools to work with compared to other states. So right now, what do we have? We have, my screen go on? We currently have 23 TIF districts. 14 are active, 8 retired, 1 is pending, which would be Schooner Ridge. So last year, in your handouts, at the end of the fiscal year, we brought in $3,049,803 from reimbursements through our TIF programs. how those monies were expended, $1.1 million out for credit enhancement agreements. You see the list we have out there, Tamborons, mall area, that go on and on. Most of those that you have in front of you have some sort of credit enhancements that rate from 25% to 75%. The bulk, the rest of the bulk of that $3 million, the revenues that come in get spent on debt service and also transfer to the general fund. So currently, probably the largest that these TIF funds are paying for right now, debt service, and Jill could correct me, but I believe that the would be the mall traffic improvements in the parking garage that we have out here, and also the industrial park. The transfer to the general fund, why those amounts get higher is because a good example is Schooner Ridge. We do a credit enhancement agreement in a TIF district. We cap the amount, and if they have a $6.5 million building, we're projecting out a certain amount. They build a $12 million. It gets paid back sooner. When they hit that amount, a lot of times it's written into that TIF agreement that those monies go back into our general fund, and I'm guessing that's what the bulk of that $980,000 is going back in there. So it's a safety net. If the numbers are off and we're conservative with them, that money goes back into our general fund. So as looking at the list, a lot of these businesses and expansions would not exist if we didn't utilize the credit enhancement agreements. Bedard Medical, probably a good example. Tamborans, who put, I believe, $25 million investment into the machinery out there, which wouldn't have done without a credit enhancement agreement. And the Auburn Ice Arena. And why you have different amounts, we try to, like I mentioned before, grab that captured amount that we're going to lose to state subsidy or to the county, and if we go above that, we have to show the benefit of that. So 62 Spring Street, Minot Avenue, Troy and Hampshire Street, they have high amounts, and the reason why we did that is they wouldn't have got enough credit points to have the project. None of that money would have existed, so they needed a higher amount to score higher. So we have a large variety of TIFs, credit enhancement agreements, as you see in front of us. They're complicated. We track them. We're going to continue to track them, see how they can be amended. So if we can come up with over 20 years an amendment to TIFs that may save us $2 million in these tax shifts, that's what we certainly like to calculate out. So that's pretty much a summary where we're at. I had a long presentation and put together. We will be coming back, like I stated. We have a TIF policy now. It's outdated because it was tied in with Lewiston and Lewiston Auburn Growth Council. We think it's important, we've mentioned this before, that we have a standalone TIF policy and a cooperative TIF policy with Lewiston for cooperation reasons.
Mr. Chamings, thank you very much for this, and frankly, that is a great summary. That's a good, I think, a good starting point. I'll open up to the council for some questions, kind of focused on this, if we could.
Real quick,
Yes.
because my concern is not so much with TIF districts, but what I asked before was a good comparison with or without TIFing. So maybe going forward, we can maybe look more like that as well. But do you have an idea what the total valuation that's in a TIF, within TIF districts right now in the city?
I don't have it right in front of me, but yes, we absolutely have that on our assessment.
I saw the revenues, but I didn't see the total.
Total valuation?
Yeah, that's under TIF right
Tax
now.
Yeah, I'm guessing we're lucky enough to have the assessor here. She may have a wild guess of our assessment exemption. I guess not with that one.
Okay. I mean, you can give me an
in our
exact
assessment.
number.
We can have that available tomorrow.
I guess what I was trying to go at too, and I want to understand this too, that when we're doing our valuation for figuring the mill rate, TIF district, valuation within a TIF is not part of that value.
That is correct.
Because we've sheltered it. So when we report to the state or whatever our valuation.
That's what saves us the money by keeping
Right.
that tax shelter.
No, I understand that, but I'm talking about the mill rate. When we're determining the mill rate, is the value within TIFs included to establish the mill rate? Or is that deducted before we establish the mill rate?
It's taxed separately. That's how the money goes back in the TIF. It gets subtracted out in the assessment. So the amount that's sheltered that the state has shows a lower amount after the.
Right. So I guess what your question is that it's not. So when we're looking at we just got a report of assessed value, And when we come up with a certain assessed value and a mill rate, the assessed value that we're using does not include money that's included in a TIF.
Yeah, your
That's
commitment
sheltered, right?
form will
That's-
show that exact amount that's in there.
Okay.
That is why we try to make the exact amount where that shift comes into place, so the maximum amount of money to go to that value added. We want to keep adding that value with inflation, so our mill rate can try to flatten it out. So as we add all the value, we try to add value as quick as we can. We try to shift that to the exact percentage where the state is going to take that money and the county is going to give us more money. That's the value in that TIF.
No, I understand that. I guess what I'm trying to get at, maybe not clear. We're trying to build growth to lower the mill rate or stabilize the mill rate so that taxpayers can benefit from growth. So I guess why I'm bringing the question up is that if we have $20 million in TIF districts, that doesn't include that doesn't lower the mill rate because we've taken that off from the top before we report our assessed value for the city.
Well, no, because when you get back to the revenue and expenditure side, so if you got 20 million, then 10 million, if you got $20 million and you're pulling $460,000 in taxes off of that, you're going to lose $230,000 off the revenue side of that and the appropriation side of that. So if that amount gets added to it, you can say, I'm raising that much more money. You are, but you're going to be paying the county that money, and then your revenue for your other revenues and your revenues coming in from 1 and 2 are going to be lowered. So when Jill goes in and does her assessment of that calculation, those monies come back out of there. So you may raise that money, but you're going to lose that money because you're going to be paying a higher amount. So would you raise more money if you put that full value in? You would, but that money you raised is going to go right back out.
Well, I guess what I want to have the discussion so we understand it is there is a cost to doing this, and it's in the taxpayer who's paying a higher mill rate because the evaluation is lower due to the TIF districts. If we added that money back in, theoretically, I'm not saying we do it, but if we add all that into the valuation, the mill rate would go down.
No.
Not necessarily.
No?
No, it wouldn't. There's cases when you overuse the TIFs that could be true, but when you stick to your tax shift and you're just trying to grab that 49%, that doesn't cost the taxpayers a nickel. That is our goal, is to not cost the taxpayer a nickel, but then retain that money to use it for our own projects. In reality, when you're doing stuff like Schooner Ridge, it could actually, in the long run, help subsidize the taxpayers because we are then building up a road that in the long run is going to be, in the short term, is going to need to be rebuilt, that's being paid for by our lower share of the county bill and us keeping our revenues from the school. So in reality, it helps the mill rate.
Separation?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think this has been a great start. Thank you very much, Mr. Chamings. We'll be seeing a lot of you in small, economic, bite-sized chunks.
Thank you.
You like how I played that, economic? That's a pun.
Right size, yes.
Pun. Right size, right size. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, this actually might work. Next, we have an executive session. Council? Next on the agenda, we have an executive session.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I make a motion we go into executive session pursuant to 1 MSRA 4056C.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilor Titus and a second from Councilor Walker. All those in favor? Vote of 7-0, we're in executive session. Now call to order this meeting of November 15th, 2018. 19th.
November 19th.
November 19th. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, next we have one consent item on the agenda. I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we approve Order 96-119-2018, accepting transfer of $746 foreclosure assets in U.S. currency to the Auburn Police Department.
Second.
I have a motion for Councilor Titus, and I have a second for Councilor Fournier. Show of hands, all those in favor? Opposed, abstained, none being. The order passes 7-0. Next, minutes. Next are the minutes of the October 15th, 2018 meeting.
Make a motion that we accept the minutes from October 1st, 2018.
Okay.
Second.
I have a motion for Councilor Titus, and a second from Councilor Fournier. Show of hands, all those in favor? Opposed, abstained, none being. Minutes are accepted, vote is 7-0. Now on to communications, presentations and recognitions. First on the agenda, I have a presentation from Mr. Jeremiah Bartlett from the Complete Streets Committee. He's going to give us about a 10-minute update.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, my name is Jeremiah Bartlett, and I am the Vice Chair of the Lewiston Auburn Complete Streets Committee. I am fighting a cold, so if I start to break up, just bear with me. So yes, this is our sort of annual update of things that the committee has worked on in the past year. So just as a reminder, you know, when the committee's looking at projects that may have some review by us as per the city's ordinance, you know, typically we're looking at streets that are being resurfaced, updated, reconstructed, changed in some sort of significant way where the Complete Streets Ordinance would take place. And we have a Complete Streets Design Manual, and so Auburn staff apply those principles that are actually sort of spelled out in the manual for best practices to each project, and then staff present projects of significance to us for review. Now, we haven't done this before, and hopefully we don't, but certainly the ordinance allows that if staff and the committee arrive at an impasse, at some sort of outcome, we would actually come forward to the council for your input and final decision. I mean, ultimately, as was anything that's sort of blessed by the council, you folks would weigh in at the end of the day. And I certainly want to say that staff have been very helpful this year. They've been very consistent in bringing things to us, accepting feedback, and we've been very happy about that. So here's just a couple of images. On the left is an older project that we think sort of still meets some of the Complete Streets ideals, which is sort of Main Street near Academy and Elm. And then if you look toward the right, we have South Main Street, which was recently reworked. And here's a few more pictures of South Main. So a lot of the sort of the standard things that tend to get looked at in terms of complete streets is going to more high visibility crosswalks. Excuse me. At this point, Auburn does a great job with that. Of the two cities, I would say the best job, to be honest.
I'm sorry, just for us folks, that could you what's high visibility crosswalks?
Sure, no problem.
Yeah, just a little bit more definition. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so high visibility would be when you see the large white blocks as you're approaching a crosswalk. That's considered the high visibility, as opposed to the older standard, which are the two sort of skinny white lines running perpendicular to the direction of vehicular travel. Those don't stand out as well as the large blocks that are running parallel with the direction of vehicular travel. That's considered a high visibility crosswalk.
And I'm sorry, you did say that Auburn seems to be doing a much significantly better job than Lewiston? on this?
Yes.
Significantly, I think was the word for
Yes.
the newspaper reporter.
The
Very good. Significantly.
I'm going to get in trouble.
Phone number down?
Yeah. But Auburn actually does that standard now everywhere. I'd say it's one of very few places in Maine that does.
Excuse me, I'm trying to remember, I see them at night a lot, I mean, and I do a lot of traveling at night. Are they fluorescent type? Do they react with lighting? I've never really noticed that.
Yeah, when they are installed, typically what happens is you get a special street paint, and they actually mix, it could be a glass bead, there's other materials out there, it gets mixed in with the paint, and it's sprayed on, and that's to achieve what's called retroreflectivity.
Good.
And that allows for a certain amount of the lighting that comes from the vehicular headlights to bounce back to the driver, which is kind of important. I could have a whole session on retroreflectivity in aggregate, but I suspect that's not what you folks are here for.
Thank you.
Also, upgrading sidewalks and ramps to meet ADA requirements, and certainly those are requirements, not just something we'd like to achieve. Modifications to signalization and pedestrian phasing to improve traffic flow. Street trees and esplanades to protect pedestrians, but also to allow for snow storage between the edge of the street and the sidewalks, which obviously at this point in the year is becoming a big topic. Lane reductions to reduce traffic conflicts in the sense of where there are areas where there may be lanes that have lots of left turning traffic and lots of through traffic, trying to redo the street so that you have like an exclusive left turn lane and then dedicated through lanes. Multi-use paths and trails, bicycle lanes, and parking. Any questions on any of that? So recent projects that we did sort of in the last year or so, we've had some involvement with. These are sort of the highlights. There have been some smaller projects we've taken a look at as well. 8th Street, which included sidewalks from South Main to Broad Street. Lake Auburn Avenue, a speed table was put in at Washburn, and then crosswalks with ADA upgrades. Lake Street, curb extensions for shorter crosswalks, delineated parking, putting in the Esplanade as a crosswalk buffer, as well as, again, for some snow storage, bringing in the road width a bit for lower vehicle speeds, a big complaint from the neighborhood, and then a raised intersection at Davis and Lake, as there were real issues with people stopping at the stop signs there, and it does seem to be working better. Court Street at Harris Street, crosswalk upgrade to include bulb outs, or what we call curb extensions, and the LED flashing signs for the Court Street crossing. That really benefits the high school students at Edward Little. Hampshire Street, I think a lot of folks are familiar with that, curb extensions, lighting, and changes to the road width. Spring Street, ADA upgrade at the library crosswalk. And then obviously there's been a lot of work going on in and around the Peace Bridge, or the South Bridge as some call it. And more to come next year with changes certainly in New Auburn. We've started looking at some of those plans. So there's a lot going on in Auburn. And this is just a view of what the striping on the bridge should look like in the spring when it's all set and done.
Great.
So that's it in a nutshell. Happy to answer any questions.
Councilor Lasagna.
Mr. Bartlett, thank you for the work. I think it's really important. It looks better as well as being safer. Is there a threshold at which the Complete Streets Committee gets involved? Somebody's, if they're just doing a sidewalk, is there some point where they say we really need to look at this through the lens of the complete streets?
Yeah, it's really anything that goes above and beyond sort of small-scale repairs. If you were repairing a section of damaged sidewalk, we're not going to get involved with that. If the striping is worn out somewhere, we're not going to get involved with that necessarily unless a safety issue or some other community issue has been brought to our attention. I will say that sometimes community members do bring things to our attention with their concerns, so we'll certainly discuss that, talk about that. But typically, it's where there's some sort of intervention of significance. The least intervention of significance is what's called a mill and fill, which is where we take out the top layer of asphalt on a street and put in a new layer. What's been triggering it a lot lately is when there are sewer separation projects that the city has been doing, and typically what happens is Once you have that kind of work going on, there may be a desire to put in new water lines, new gas lines, and at that point, you sort of find yourself with rebuilding the street. And so at that point, we ask a lot of questions. So that was kind of the situation on Lake Street, for example. That's what sort of drove some of those initial discussions. So I suspect that as the years go on and more of the utilities are modernized, it may become a bigger question of when does that intervention make sense? Certainly if there's an outstanding safety issue where folks are just extremely concerned and there's a track record of injuries, that might be a good place to have a conversation. It doesn't factor into the intervention from a physical standpoint, but certainly from health and general human welfare to the public, then it might become another conversation.
One other question. Do you think about looking at Center Street in terms of complete streets planning?
Well, first of all, you're looking at the former consultant who was almost chased out of Auburn for an alternative vision of Center Street. So I could go on ad nauseum on Center Street. I would say that Center Street has had long-standing safety issues. Years ago, when I did work on it, the section essentially from the mall down through where it met up with Turner Street would have over 100 crashes a year. It remains a high crash area. I think the city's done a good job with some of the site plans. They've come in and done some work on access management with the driveways, but Center Street's a challenge. Speeds are very high. Pedestrian permeability is very low. There are still folks who try desperately to cross the street there and really don't have a place to go. It's a corridor who does strongly need to be revisited, and I have a personal and professional interest over the years in that one myself. So hopefully there will be something that would afford us that opportunity.
How does something like that get triggered?
Well, in that case, if there was a paving project, if there was a safety project, if there were changes to an intersection being proposed, if the MPO did another examination of the corridor itself funded with federal funds, there's several triggers that could do it. And certainly, we're more than happy to take direction from the council. If the council set a corridor as a safety concern, as something, warranting additional study, I'm sure that the Complete Streets Committee would be more than happy to work with you, work with staff, work with anyone to work on those sorts of things, because I think, we all have an interest in seeing this work for everyone, and I certainly don't want to think we have to wait until we're digging up pipes in order to do those interventions.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilor Gary, actually.
Sorry.
That's right there. I'll come right back.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for coming and giving this presentation, and I'm glad for your committees being formed so that it will make our streets and our city more user-friendly and ADA compliant. I don't mean any disrespect to your committee when I ask this question. Do you have any members of your committee that are physically challenged?
No, and in fact, we've asked. We continue to look for members when the time comes again. We've asked in the past. We would be extremely interested, to be honest, in someone with mobility challenges, because to be honest, those of us who are, shall we say, normally abled, it's difficult at times for us to understand that perspective. I actually went to a training that some engineers were given some years ago by the Department of Transportation, and it was in cooperation with a couple other departments, where they gave folks training, what is it like to have certain challenges, and it's pretty surprising how different it can be. So I think, every so often slots open up again, and again, I'd love to just put it out there. Please, 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 someone who sees it from another perspective, please join, because we need that perspective. We need that to understand, what it's really like, because I could get some training, but I can only pretend.
Again,
it's easy to take for granted that you can get around easily, I guess is the point.
And again, I mean no disrespect. I know you try to be ADA compliant, but what's good on paper may not be good in practice. because some of your improvements look great and may be great, but there are several people that I know in Auburn housing apartments and throughout the city and constituents we run into, especially with our age-friendly group. We've got a bunch of them that are now, because we are becoming more mobile, I mean they're more able to get around, they're out more, but they are running into issues like over around the library with like the cobblestone to bricks. They have their power chair, and if they're not careful, they'll be, going at not a bad pace, just enough to get, to maneuver on the sidewalk. Their wheel will hit just right, and they'll be almost pitched out of their chair. If they're not belted in, then, they could potentially go flying. So since they learned, which sidewalks that they can't go on because of that, they end up in the street. And sometimes there's a bike lane, so they'll use that. But, so that's why you see a lot of people up around the library. They're coming down into the street because they can't maneuver the sidewalks. And it's happening at different other key locations. And then when winter comes, even though our Public Works Department tries very, very hard to keep our sidewalks clear from snow, if you're in a power chair or a walker, there's some days when, because of my physical disability, I need my walker, and it's a pain in the tush to try to get my wheeled walker from Barker to here because of the slippery roads and different sidewalks. So then I'm in the street and in the bike lane. So I'm glad that we widened the bike lanes, and according to traffic driver code, you got to stay, a certain distance away from the biker. We've also got to teach drivers you got to do the same for people in a wheelchair, because you don't know what's going to happen, because they're not quite as mobile, and if they hit a rock, they could be pitched out of their chair.
Thank you. And I think Councillor,
I'll be real quick.
Last question on this, yes?
I'll be real quick. I really appreciate the work that's been done so far. I used to complain all the time about, I lived on Davis Avenue for 45 years, and they've heard this many times, but that intersection was horrible. And everything that you've done that I've seen, I've witnessed it, and it's really so much better. The idea is that we want to make everyone safe, and we want to make everyone obey, the rules. My concern is this, is that here in the center of Auburn, our young people wish to see a walking community. I'd like to see it brought back to what it used to be that way when I first moved here many, many years ago. And it begins with Center Street. That's where the traffic speed has started, and that's what feeds into here. And it's like a feeding frenzy by the time you get here. So whatever we need to do, I would highly recommend that we look at slowing the traffic down from Center Street to here, and knowing that we have residents on both sides of Center Street as well as businesses. Many people are trying to cross, and I'm just holding my breath when I come through, and if you try to stop, someone will run into you because they're not noticing those people. So that is my hope, that we can seriously consider that, slowing the traffic down from there.
I think we could bring that into the council, and
yeah,
they're going to work off direction from us.
Yeah.
I have one direction. One thing that I got. Oh, Councillor Titus, before I go for it.
Real quick, just quick question. You mentioned again. Thank you for your work. I think the bump outs, we have to get used to them. With the curb extensions, because I've had a few people that said, how does the plow get around those, and some other issues that go along with that. But let's see how that goes. But you mentioned a couple of times that you follow utility work. I'm on the utility boards, both the water and sewer, and they say they follow the city's plan of attack, and they don't dig up, put pipe in the ground unless a road's going to be reconstructed. Do you see that something different there, or just?
It's difficult to completely separate one from the other.
Well, I know, but they usually
and
go
as
right
someone
in,
who
yeah.
works in another city, we both tend to point in the other's direction as to who starts what. It would be disingenuous to say there aren't street reconstructions that happen on their own because of street conditions or drainage. It would also be disingenuous to say if you do enough utility work that it's not going to trigger with typically trench repair requirements, that you would have to go in and do a more significant intervention, including a box cut and reclamation of gravels, that type of thing in a street. So they sort of work together.
Well, they try to, I think, because the boards that I'm on say they try to work with the city and plan.
And to be honest, I think Auburn has been doing an excellent job in the last few years of sort of identifying these strategic targets, figuring out what streets need intervention and need utility work. And by doing that, there's a lot of money being saved. I mean, it might look kind of fancy with the paint, but to be honest, if you're getting your utility work done at the same time as your street reconstruction, you're saving taxpayers and ratepayers significant amounts of money.
Yeah, by doing it at the same
and
time.
you're ending up with a much better product.
Right.
These streets going back in, to be honest with you, are generally much better than the ones that were there before. When I first moved to Auburn, there were a lot of things I liked about it. The condition of our streets was not among them, and I think it's come a long
Getting
way.
there, we're getting there. One last question real quick, and as you mentioned, a manual of best practices.
Yes.
Is that something that comes from DOT or some engineering firm, or?
No.
The idea of the bump outs, where do they come from?
Yeah, so in this particular case, we had been able to successfully get federal money provided through ATRC, the MPO, to do an RFP to find a consultant who was practiced in these types of things. And so we worked with ultimately an organization called Street Plans out of Brooklyn, but actually their founder is from coastal Maine and went to Bates College for a while. So he was very familiar with the area, very passionate about the work. I think provided us with an excellent product for, I think, a very reasonable fee. And it's intended to be a living document. Essentially, they looked at best street design practices from around the country, sort of took that, reworked it a bit to have it make sense for here. There are certain types of streets that might make sense in Florida that do not make sense here. And it's essentially considered a living document. I think every so often what we're going to do is crack it back open because this stuff changes. The science can change a bit. We feel like we're moving in the right direction, but you're never done. And so it did actually have to pass muster with Maine DOT. The department reviewed it, but we certainly feel that it's a well done product. And as someone who does this type of stuff professionally, I certainly was very happy with it as well. I think we've been very well served by it. I think we've been very well served by the process and the ordinance. I really think it's something that this community can be very proud of. I just want to go back to the topic of accessibility and sidewalks. Those are things that would be great to get flagged to us and get flagged to staff, because if they're small things, maybe it's a repair, but if they're not, maybe it's a conversation we need to have. The library is an asset for everybody, and if it's not being accessible to everybody, then we need to have that conversation. That's important.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, just a quickie.
Quickie?
Yes,
Okay, quick.
for me. If you'd like to set up a meeting at any of the older generation apartment houses run by Auburn Housing, let me know and I can set up a time and a meeting and a room.
That's a good idea.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll talk with the committee about that.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to wrap up. There's one thing, and I'm concerned to ask this, but aesthetics. Have you, in the committee, have talked about aesthetics with regards to transportation within Lewiston and Auburn? Lack thereof, increase, enhanced? And, well, if you haven't, with the pause, I'm going to assume you haven't, do you think it's in your purview to talk about aesthetics?
It's an interesting discussion. I think that the ordinance hasn't really been as strongly geared towards the aesthetic outcomes, but certainly as we become more practiced in these outcomes, I think the question of aesthetics, appearance, is going to become more significant, and I think it's a conversation we need to have. I'm not going to consider myself an aesthetics expert, but there are those who are, and certainly sometimes there are things people know are aesthetic, and sometimes they're not.
Well, let me challenge the group. I think your committee is the perfect committee to take this challenge on. It's appropriate that you have the slide up of the rehabilitated Bernard Lau Peace Bridge. We have asked the Maine DOT if it's possible to paint this bridge a color other than typical Maine DOT green. They came back and said yes, with a couple particular requirements, and obviously would have to be approved by Maine DOT. Since it is a bridge connecting two municipalities, we did not think it would be right to really do it all over, pick a color ourselves and say, surprise, Lewiston, though I have thought of that and I think it still might be a doable idea. I was wondering if it's something that your committee could take on the next 30 days or 60 days when you meet, discuss potential colors, coordinate with the city manager and his staff on some of the requirements, and give it a whirl specifically because, or really nicely because it's obviously Lewiston and Auburn together. You could probably make that decision effectively and convey that to the council.
Yeah, I think we'd be happy to do that. We have our next meeting, well, next week. So we haven't set an agenda yet. Vice Chair has some input, so,
Okay, well,
sure.
if you could reach out to the city manager or myself, we have some emails.
Do you have some potential swatches, or?
We don't have swatches, we just can't do a red or a maroon. I wanted to do every little maroon, but they said it looks too much like rust.
Yeah.
That would be bad.
Oh,
Not
yeah.
going to do Lewiston Blue Devil blue.
Yeah.
So we have to have something in the middle. But when we have swatches, we can send you the email requirements from the Maine DOT.
Okay.
And that kind of process and let you chop on that a little bit.
We'd be happy to talk about it.
Okay, very good. Well,
Sounds
thank you very
great.
much, Mr. Bartlett. Get creative on that one. And no, there is no color swatches. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, we have Councilor Lasagna and Mr. Zach Lenhart, who will be giving us a brief discussion about the Citizens Advisory Committee and some updates around that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, City Council, City Manager. I'm going to need some help from Zach here. First, I'd like Zach to introduce himself because he's maybe new to some of you in the position that he's currently taken over from Yvette Boudinot.
My name's Zachary Lenhart. I'm the new Community Development Manager for Community Development and Economic Development Community Department. I've been on the job for about a month now as Yvette's about to retire, and so I feel very fortunate to have that overlap as I'm taking over for her.
So we're going to do a quick little background on what the role of the Citizens Advisory Council is, and then talk a little bit about how we are kind of strategizing about ways to change some of the process, I guess. Some we can and some we can't because of the federal requirements. So as you can see, HUD requires that those of us that get grants prepare formal plans as a condition of receiving the funds. And the CAC is tasked, the Citizens Advisory Committee is tasked with the development of a 5-year consolidated plan and annual action plans. The CAC reviews the Consolidated Annual Performance and Evaluation Report, the CAPER, for conformance with adopted goals. Do you want to say any more about that? What do you think? So this is the makeup of the CAC. Councilor Gary is on it, but as a citizen of the community, I'm on it as a representative of the City Council and the chair of the committee. And then currently we have about 12 members.
I think about 10 came to the last meeting.
10 on the committee, and the goal of it is to address low-income community and make changes to alleviate poverty in the communities. Yeah. Anything else?
To address blight and economic development as well, that we can address with CDBG and home funds.
So the last time that the consolidated plan, which is a plan for laying out ways that we are going to address issues in the community, in the designated communities, was approved in 2015, and we're entering the final year of the plan, meaning that we need to begin to think about creating another 5-year consolidated plan. There are individual action plans that address what the overall consolidated plan has said, and there are summaries of what we've done, the activities that we've taken, and the resources that are to be used to address each of the activities. As part of the plan, the CAC will be meeting to review the funding applications and program activities for conformance. So, and correct me, this, Zach, maybe where you're know more of the details. Kind of two streams of funding. One is funding that is the housing and urban development funds that goes to address housing in the community, specifically through programs. And then the Community Advisory Committee is a group of citizens that look at other ways that we want to address blight in our communities.
Yeah, essentially that's how it works. The Citizens Advisory Committee approves the overall action plan, which essentially is the budget of the department.
So this is, you can see this is the action plan schedule that we have. So first of all, the request for proposal goes out soon. And then there is a subrecipient training. Those people who we've been looking at it about switching the second and the third line so that the subrecipient proposals are due. And once we see those, then we have the training. So if people come to a training and decide not to apply, we feel that that probably doesn't work in terms of the logistics of the process, so that we would do that. Then the staff reviews the proposals, as you can see, January, February. The subcommittee, there's a subcommittee that looks and does some basic scoring of them. And then the full committee will meet in February. That's the committee that Councilor Gary is on and I'm on, and the about 12 citizens are on. The budget review is reviewed with the city manager. Then we workshop with the city council in March so that you will see what we're looking at, what we're thinking of doing. And then the public notice goes out. So there's a comment period, a public hearing, and the plan is adopted by the city council, the individual plans, and then we have to submit it to HUD. Anything you want to add?
No.
So one of the things is the Community Development Department will begin a new 5-year consolidated plan for 2021 to 2025. It involves a lot of time and input and participation from citizens. In the past, they actually hired a consultant to help do some research and get input from community members. We're rethinking that. Then the Citizens Advisory Committee considers the needs of the community and approves the plan to meet national objectives. Many of the national objectives are set by HUD align with the objectives of the Auburn's comprehensive plan. So this is one of the things that we've been talking about, is to better align. They don't overlap, and the timing of them doesn't work perfectly, but is to align some of the Community Development Department, our consolidated plan, looking at what is going on in the city with the Auburn's comprehensive plan, and even taking information from the steering committee, the Strategic Planning Steering Committee, that may help us to make some decisions or some direction in terms of what we move forward with. So it may seem a little confusing. Any questions?
Thank you very much for your time and both your work, and welcome aboard to the new position. I do believe you've been with the city now for some time, so.
Yes, I was a code enforcement officer for almost 6 years before this.
So you left the dark side and came over to the good. That's
Yeah.
Any questions or comments from council?
Just one quick comment.
Of course, Councilor Titus.
In past few years, I can remember that when the action plan and budget comes to council, the committee's already decided what they want to do, and council doesn't really have any input at that point. They usually can make comments, but usually it's either, you know, pass it or don't pass it. Is there any plan in the future sometime to maybe get council involved earlier on in the process and ask their input in certain areas before the committee makes their decisions and put their budget together?
I think that's a really good comment, Councilor Titus, and it's something that we'll consider as part of looking at these other plans that are going on, so we're not doing this in a siloed way. So I think that definitely we can do that and workshop it with the City Council when we get to a point where it seems like here's what we're thinking of doing. But again, we defer to the Community Citizens Advisory Council for the final decisions.
Very good, thank you.
Both of you, thank you very much. Oh, Councilor Walker, yes.
I would like you to also to look at maybe some of the things that were prior being brought to you and not forgetting where they were, what they were asked about, because sometimes things are brought forward, but they're brought forward thinking that if you gave them 10,000 last year, that's all they need this year, and they may have been asking for 25,000. And you forgot about that, or you've just kind of placed it in the left-hand drawer or something, you know. So I would like you to look back and make sure that what we're bringing forward is exactly what somebody really needs, and don't just take it for granted because they agreed with you that they're happy with what they got, because that's not always true.
And they should be, every year they should be putting in a new application and asking what they're asking for. So, you know, this will be my first time through it, so I'll definitely be looking at everyone individually and not what they've been doing in the past.
Thank you.
And I think it's a good point, but it's also important that the applicants know that they need to ask for what they need.
And I guess the last thing I'd ask of you is to really pay attention to who's on that board and who you have, because sometimes we get old and we get stale and we just say yes, 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 and we really don't do a lot of extra work. And this needs people that really pay attention and think about everybody and everything, not just their little thing that they really like themselves. So, you know, it may be a good thing to look at some people and say maybe it's time to get more people on our committee that are new people.
I really appreciate it, and that's one of the first things that Zach and I are planning to do, is to do some recruitment, and we discussed it with the Citizens Advisory Council. Where were we missing, sort of what kind of constituent groups were we missing, and to do some more active recruitment for membership. We do ask for a 5-year commitment, so we're upfront about that. Yep. And that can be a little daunting to people, but I think you're right, we need to make sure that we're representing the whole community.
Thank you.
Councilor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What happens is we have only a set amount of monies, like for the social agencies, and we have X number of requests. So when we try to figure it out, because I sit on the committee, the subcommittee that looks at all their applications, we look at what they requested, like the good Councilor Walker says, what they requested last year and what the request is this year. But if we only got one pot of money, we get to divide it up. What I'm telling a city department that keeps requesting funds, they keep giving us a low ball number of what they need. I'll be upfront. The rec scholarships, for one. They request X numbers, dollars, knowing that they need more dollars. So when we look at the funding, what we have to fund them, my hands are tied. I can't try to fight for more dollars than what they requested, given the amount of money in that pot, and also, I mean... Okay,
so you want them to request more?
That's what I keep trying to tell. I'm also on the Rec Advisory Board, and I've been telling our board, when the director submits the report for these rec scholarships, come in with the actual number, so that if we cut, it's still going to be high enough. Then coming in, say like if they spend $40,000 and only asking for $15,000, I fight to give them $15,000.
Duly noted, Mr. Manager.
Noted.
Good, thank you. And let's keep on that topic as we get closer to budget season. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time tonight. Next up is Chief Chase, Auburn Fire Department.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. City Manager had asked me to do a quick department review with you, as some of the other departments have done, and then also to touch base with you about the fire study that was conducted in the Taylor Pond neighborhood, and to give you the findings and results of that study. So the fire department currently is comprised of 64 firefighters. 21 of them are licensed at the paramedic level. We have a vacant deputy chief's position. We are in the hiring process to fill that position at this time. Interviews will be the first week of December. Fire prevention officer, 2 support personnel, myself, and as you know, we operate out of 3 firehouses Central Station on Minot Ave, Center Street, and South Main Street. Our calls for service remain pretty consistent at around 4,500 calls a year. We do see a slight increase of a couple of percent in the last couple of years, but it's trended pretty consistently. And as you can see, the breakdown of fire versus EMS calls also remains pretty consistent. Approximately 3/4 of our calls are classified as rescue calls. Largest majority of those are EMS calls for EMS transport. Another graph showing again that's that three-quarters of our calls being rescue related. And again, these numbers now are just this current fiscal year, July through October. And you can see the breakdown here. Again, we run approximately right around 10 EMS calls a day. And our fire calls, we've had in this 4-month period 30 fires. This is a breakdown by our zones. Again, this is a 4-month period, and what we really look for in these types of numbers is our distribution of resources and to make sure that we're meeting the needs. And it is pretty equally broken out. You'll see that the Minot Ave station and the Center Street station have higher call volume. Our rescues are based out of those stations, and they're also located closer to our population centers and our care facilities, so we would expect that to be higher. We also track independently our calls to Lewiston. This is a number I'm monitoring pretty closely for trends and increases. That's primarily driven most of those calls. There are a few in there that are fire mutual aid to support them at structure fires, whatever the case might be. But we continue to monitor closely any uptick in our EMS responses to Lewiston to see if there's trends there with regard to us going to Lewiston and supporting their system more than we may have in the past. This graph, again, we use these graphs to really show that our resources are being balanced. And if we look at them, we can see that across our rescues, Rescue 3 and Rescue 5, they're pretty comparable in the number of calls that they receive month to month. Our engines are very balanced, as is our truck. Again, it's a resource allocation piece. It allows us to make sure we've got the right people and the right equipment in the right districts to meet the needs. I'd actually go down one more slide. Through this 4-month period, year to date, we looked retrospectively from fiscal year 18 to fiscal year 19 over this 4-month period, and our overall spending through that 4 months is down 13% year to date, and our overtime is down about 20% year to date. I'm always cautious about early in the fiscal year talking about the reduced spending. Anything can happen. We run expensive vehicles that have expensive repairs and those types of things, and to some extent, that can really change those numbers pretty quickly. But I think we're doing the right things and we're trying to make the right changes, and certainly I think there's more than luck associated with some of these improvements. Our overtime breakdown, talk through this slide a little bit. You can see overtime and the causes of overtime traditionally, and again, it's from this 4-month period from 2018 to the 4-month period in 2019, fiscal year 2019. Overtime vacation has been virtually eliminated. Some of that actually has been reclassified in overtime vacancy. You'll see that really shows. But even with that being said, if you were to compound those two together, there's still almost a 40% reduction in overtime in that classification year to date. So again, overall in overtime's down about 20% year to date. We still have some areas we're continuing to work on, but a big part of this is we have a new data system that's allowing us to track these shift by shift, individual by individual, cause by cause, and allows us to make some actions in that regard. One of our challenges with those overtimes, and you'll see, has been vacancies, and this is a really tough chart, but what it shows us is we did, prior to me becoming chief, there was a hiring of 4 personnel, and we haven't really even been able to see the quite the full ramification of that because of vacancies. We've had unexpected retirements, some folks leaving, and military deployments. And so we're doing a hiring process right now. We'll talk about some of the challenges, but staffing has been a challenge. So my point to this slide is that we hope to get to a point of stabilization where that staffing basket remains full to reduce those vacancies further, so we see even further savings on the overtime. Some of the other things that we do, our fire prevention division, of course, they do origin and cause investigations. So they're helping to drive our data with determining the cause and origin of fires, and also helping to support the state fire marshals and the police department with prosecution and investigation if needed for arson fires. They do plans review and code compliance for any new developments, and that's both on the commercial and the residential side. So as new developments are coming, they're reviewing those plans and making sure that they are compliant with the code. We do over 450 apartment building fire code inspections as well per year. Last year we did 118 community outreach events. Through this most recent Fire Prevention Week, which ended through the month of October, crews did over 50 presentations, fire prevention presentations to elementary school children. We touched over 1,500 elementary school kids, and they get an age-specific curriculum delivered to them that's been developed. We actually have a process where last year we tested the kids. We got a sense of what they know and what they're retaining, and there's been an age-specific developmental curriculum developed for all of them as you go up through age by age. So the fifth graders aren't getting the same very rudimentary stop, drop, and roll message that they may have gotten 6 times before, but it's more contoured to their age group. And of course, there was the Taylor Pond risk assessment that we participated in, and I'll get into some further details with that. Our EMS division, again, we spoke at, there's currently 21 paramedics, and 4 more firefighters are enrolled in paramedic school. We've seen some real advantages in additions to our EMS division with the dedicated EMS director. He started early in the calendar year, but some of those advantages have been a real focused quality assurance program, a dedicated resource at the administration level that can hold folks accountable and manage quality of patient delivery, quality assurance of patient delivery care. The other big advantage that's helped us is we've raised our certification levels. We've been able to bring an in-house training program that he drives and delivers and brings in recruits to help him teach. But we just recently did our first advanced cardiac life support class. We had 33 of our firefighters attend that and get certified, which greatly increased our certification. But because it was in-house, we were able to do it for about $7,300 less than if we had sent all of them outside. So we're really trying to capitalize on that position and its abilities to help the organization. Briefly on the Taylor Pond wildfire risk reduction and community protection plan. This was a program we solicited the Maine Forest Service to come in and do a fire risk assessment in the Taylor Pond community. And their primary focus with them are, they call it a WUI area, W-U-I, Wildland Urban Interface. And their primary assessments are to try to find areas where the urban atmosphere is encroaching on wildlands and to protect homes and areas. So a lot of their analysis is based on that, but the end result is fire protection, and the things that we can do to improve safety in the wildland urban interface are the same things we want to do to preserve the structures in that same area. So their goals and objectives were to evaluate the potential fire hazards in that area around Taylor Pond and to reduce and eliminate those hazards. Their objectives are to decrease the chances of wildland fire spreading to homes and other structures, ultimately saving property and lives. So they're looking at it, and when we look at the Taylor Pond area, it's a rural area, so any single home on fire, we certainly want to be able to address that need and to do our property preservation as much as we can within that home. But we also want to be sure that that fire can't get to other exposure buildings or other buildings that are nearby, and that was part of the focus. The summary of their findings were that inadequate defensible space and flammable vegetation inside the defensible space is the greatest source to Taylor Pond's elevated risk. Other factors include low water availability, quality of access roads, and signage. Those also contribute to the risk. When they talk about defensible space, some of these recommendations are really things that we put the onus back on the association and the homeowners for. So keeping flammable vegetation from overhanging your camp, while we know that people like that lifestyle because they're nestled in the woods, it certainly doesn't help protect your home when you've got dry flammable vegetation coming right up to your combustible home edges and stuff. So that's one of the things that this program really did. They went through the neighborhood and they looked at roads and access and where the water is. They surveyed the fire department to see what we had for equipment and what we could do. But then they actually went to some residences and walked around with a group and said, hey, you can trim these brushes back, or this brush back, or these bushes, or think about planting this type of vegetation if you want it because it's more resilient to fire than some others. Our takeaways and the recommendations that they made for us are to train the appropriate personnel in wildland firefighting. That's an ongoing effort for us that we continue. Install more dry hydrants in the community. And so that got me, learning the community and doing some outreach and reaching back historically. And there are some dry hydrants in these rural areas around Taylor Pond, but they were installed decades ago, and they weren't necessarily engineered, and so they haven't been put into service by the fire department for many, many years due to a lack of comfort or reliability in the system. They haven't been maintained through that period. So I'll come to you through this budget season with the opportunity to try to do some rehab of the existing dry hydrants to enhance those capabilities in the rural area. The recommendations were to acquire a tanker truck capable of shuttling water to the dry hydrants. I think one of the things that both this study and as I learned the community, I've identified as a weakness is our ability to provide water, not just in Taylor Pond, but in the rural areas, North Auburn, South Auburn. There are a lot of areas not covered by hydrants. So we're looking at that opportunity for a tanker truck, and we've started it. That includes me having to look at where our calls really are. And while we have a lot of land area in the rural areas, we don't have a lot of call volume and fires and population, to be honest with you, in those areas. So for me, as I look at it, I think that our solution looks like a multi-purpose truck. I don't think there's a lot of practicality in buying just a tanker that meets the need for 2 or 3% of our calls. I think what meets our need better is a multi-purpose truck, something that builds the functions of a tanker into an engine that we can use on 90% of our calls, but we gain the functionality that I think this recommendation is really looking for. So we'll continue to analyze that, and you'll hear more from me about those opportunities as we move forward in the future. Incorporating fire-wise building practices and new developments, that's our ability to do some outreach. And as developments come in rural areas where there aren't water, ultimately, I know there's some discussion about whether or not there should be water mains put into the Taylor Pond neighborhoods and those types of things. Those discussions come decades after developments happen, and they grow in magnitude. And I think the way to really keep ourselves from that situation in the future is as these developments come in, we start to, through code and through ordinance, drive the requirements for a fire protection cistern, for example. A lot of developments will have 30,000-gallon tanks buried in there that basically is a water source. So if you're miles and miles away from your hydrant system, let's try to work into our developments these plans that have built-in water supply systems, so that decades down the road, the folks still feel protected and they're not driving for what might be an unfeasible water expansion. So that's something that we need to get involved with early. Install high visibility signs. We've done some of that before the 4th of July. We got out in the Taylor Pond neighborhood and put up a whole bunch of reminder signs, permanent signs that fireworks are not allowed in Auburn. We have some campfire signs too. We're just waiting on permission from the organization to be able to put those on their property. This is another code piece with regard to development, widen roads to at least 24 feet. Some of those camp roads are really narrow, and you'd be very hard pressed to get one fire engine in there effectively. And what we're really looking for to be able to bring water to the fire scene is that 2 fire engines can cross paths in opposite direction, so that we can deliver our water, go up and turn around, and go back out to the next hydrant to get water. And so it's very hard to do now after the fact, right? We don't own those roads. Those are easement roads. The association needs to pay it, which is a very hard thing to get them to do that. What we need to be on the front end when we're talking about developments is to drive those road standards and try to incorporate as much as we can with regard to what the ongoing upkeep plan is for those roads, again, to protect those homes in the future. Keeping the road clearance to 14 feet in height. You know, we've got to have some ability to go into these developments and have the landowner associations prune their trees up to 14 feet in height so we can get apparatus in there. You know, a lot of their own safety is in their own court and their ability to maintain them. What we want to do is put ourselves in a position to be the experts and facilitate the discussion to try to drive the importance of them doing that work for themselves. The department challenges, we talked a little bit about staffing. It's, we just did a recent hiring process, and historically there have been as many as 200 candidates testing and passing some level of physical. And following our physical agility test in our current hiring process, I had 9 candidates to consider of varying degrees of credentials. So hiring is very tough. We're finding ourselves taking candidates that we have to put a fair amount of training into as well. So, you know, we'll continue that piece and try to do some further outreach and recruiting and try to work with some of the technical schools that are offering firefighter training and paramedic classes to try to get in there. We're also considering being a little bit of a training facility ourselves. I would like to see us move toward being able to take paramedic students have to do some ride time with EMS organizations to get their license and get the practice. I'd love to see that Auburn Fire could be a preceptor site and get some of those trainees as a recruitment tool, right? Because they get to see the department ahead of time, and we get to see the candidate. So that's a vision for me for the future to help our recruitment challenges. Firefighter training I touched on a little bit. We really are finding that we have to do a lot of firefighter training with candidates because the candidate pool isn't quite what it has been in the past, where you were getting some real seasoned folks. Our fleet reliability, you know, we continue to work with. We had a 30-year-old engine that was a real line apparatus. It was a reserve piece for us, but it suffered some mechanical issues this summer. Very expensive to repair. We haven't made that investment in that 30-year-old apparatus yet. What that does is it leaves us with one reserve piece, and it just means that we're that much more dependent on the reliability of our pieces, and so we continue to try to push that and work hard on it. And the last challenge I think is more to keep our eye on is EMS revenue. We don't have any problems currently necessarily in the EMS revenue field, but I watched the demographic discussion here as we talked, and EMS is going to become a larger percentage of our business, more than 3/4. As that baby boomer population ages, their need for EMS service is only going to increase. And so that may be a good thing. It might help drive us, but what we've seen with regard to EMS revenue is it's very demographics based, and with some of the new insurance plans with high deductibles, folks sometimes are having a hard time meeting their deductibles, and so those patient self-pay is something that we need to keep our finger on, watch the demographics and see how it affects our EMS revenues. Our initiatives we're working to try to integrate some building pre-planning into our life safety inspections. If we're getting into 450 apartment buildings, we want to create fire plans for those 450 apartment buildings, not just make sure they meet code, but that we have a tactical plan for them. We're working on implementation of a data collection system. A lot of the data I've been able to pull for this presentation would have taken me hours and hours to mine otherwise. It helps us drive our initiative on overtime, on training. But a big part of it is we're trying to collect the data and position ourselves well for the accreditation process. And that's going to be driven by our performance-based standards and being able to track our training hours and those types of things. And this data system is allowing us to do that. And another big piece that we're doing is our firefighter wellness initiatives. Cancer is the one of the leading causes of firefighter fatalities, and it touches close to home, as does, we're calling it the behavioral health of firefighters. But we're trying to put both reactive and proactive approaches toward firefighter mental health and trying to extend the career and make sure that folks stay healthy through their whole career. We're not losing folks to workers' comp or work-related injuries as a result of their behavioral health. So I would entertain any questions you might have.
Great. Thank you very much, Chief. Questions?
Just a couple of things. I just wanted to commend you. First of all, this was extremely informative. Thank you very much. And I recall when we were looking at your statistics in terms of overtime and losing money in overtime, you really made a big dent in that, and we really truly appreciate that. And I can see that you're a forward thinker. I mean, you're way ahead. You're taking on this humongous project with Taylor Pond, but when you see what's happened in California, I mean, that could easily have happened to us or can happen. So you've got a lot going on there, and you're doing it masterfully, and I truly appreciate the work that you've put into this. This is extremely exceptional.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. No questions?
No questions.
Any
Any
questions?
What's a dry hydrant?
Good question. So the normal hydrants that you see in the more developed areas of the city are a valve, and when you open that valve, it's under pressure, so water will physically come squirting out. What a dry hydrant is basically a long straw, tube, if you will, a straw that goes back to the lake. So it allows us to hook our fire engines. We might be 40 feet from the lake, but we're sucking water through that straw. We need an engine there to do it. It's not going to flow on its own. We need to pump it and draw it out. And so in the rural areas, what you look for is the opportunity to put these straws into these big bodies of water to get our fire protection water out. The challenge of the dry hydrant is they require a lot of maintenance. Over each year, they sediment in a little bit, settling around that flow pipe, and you've got to keep those, mucked out and flushed and blown out. And they need to be properly designed, because if you don't get them set to the right height below the frost level and below freeze, either they break or they don't become functional for you in the winter. And so they're a great lower cost alternative than extending water mains, but it's not 100% of the functionality you would like in an urban area.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Councilor Walker, question?
Yeah, I got a question. I don't know if they have them or don't have them, but is it possible that you could buy just a pump that is pulled by 4x4 or something, and for these dry wells or dry whatever?
Yeah, there is. We have portable pumps that you can carry, but you can certainly get one of the recommendations out of the Forest Service study was to think about either ATV-based or pumping systems, so something on the back of a small UTV to get into those types of areas like you're describing, or they call them a Type 6 engine. And when you watch the wildfire videos like you expressed in California, you'll see a lot of trucks that look like one-ton pickups, but they have a small pump based in the back of it. And again, that can get maybe down somebody's driveway much closer to the water. So that's one of the options as well. The other piece I've explored, and again, we'll probably bring forward in the budget season, is they make a firefighting apparatus that allows us to carry it out as much as 200 feet and drop it in the pond. And it uses a siphon effect. We pump water to it, but then that forces lake water back to the engine and allows us to get many more, rather than 20 feet from the water source, we might be able to draw water from it as much as 200 feet. So that's a really low gap filler, a really less expensive gap filler for us to build some capabilities as we look down the future for capital opportunities to improve the water safety in that area.
Well, great. Thank you very much, Chief. We'll look forward to your CIP presentation and further updates. Okay, stay frosty. Don't get too hot. That's another fire.
Well, Mr. Mayor, is it possible for us to get a copy of that report?
Sure. Yes. Next and last of communications, we have Superintendent Grondin, who will be presenting along, I believe, with the city manager. Will you be joining? And the two councilors. And Councilor Lasagna and Councilor Young, two city councilors that are on the high school building committee, just to give us an update on the previous several weeks. Activities. Thank you.
want to sit here? Just briefly. I'm not going to say very much.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, councilors. Pleased to have Councilors Lasagna and Young here, and Katie Grondin, the superintendent of schools. I just would like to make the point to the community that as we proceed with this vision of a new high school for Auburn, that the council is well represented on the school building committee with Councilors Lasagna and Young. I also attend, as of course does Katie. Katie and I are non-voting members, but we participate, and I appreciate and very much respect the role that Councilors Lasagna and Young are playing in this process. The community is represented also by people from the community and from the school department, in addition to Mrs. Grondin, and I've been very impressed with the process, and I'm going to defer to the two councilors to see if they would like to say something, and then ask Katie if she'd give an update to the community, to the council, and the mayor. Councilor Lasagna.
Thank you. The process has been a really good one because it's been iterative, meaning that people come up with ideas, they bring them back, the full group discusses them, they take them back, the individual subcommittees, there's a athletics subcommittee, an arts subcommittee, and then also sustainability subcommittee. So they do individual work, but what they come up with is constantly coming back to the larger group that then discusses it, and it goes back. Last week was kind of a culmination of a lot of this work where the individual subcommittees presented to community members at a forum about some of the ideas that the individual subcommittees and the larger new school building committee had come up with, to see what they thought about them, and also to ask them, what are your priorities? And there was a very good process, and there's some of the results over there, or the results over there, a good process of where people were able to look at about 20 different ideas without knowing what the price was on them, and then prioritizing what they wanted. They got dots to then prioritize, go around and put dots next to what they thought were what they want to do, and then afterwards there was the discussion about what it would actually cost. And interestingly, there wasn't too much of a change between when people decided what they thought was important without knowing the cost as to when they knew the cost, what the things that they thought they were important. And that was actually, the mayor made a suggestion to not just focus on the money right away, but focus on what it is that's important to the community. And I think the process worked really well. Some of the things that they discussed were a stadium with a turf field and lighting and bleachers. They put that forward as a packet, and these are things that the Department of Education will not pay for. There's a very strict formula that they use deciding on how much they'll pay for in terms of space, but also kind of facilities. A couple of other ones, a gym, an upgraded gym, let's see, a pool was one of the things, and a beautifully upgraded auditorium with a stage. Let's see, climate control, geothermal is a separate idea. Kind of warmer interiors with more special woods around and things like that. Distributed dining, meaning that you don't just have one dining facility, you have separate dining facilities around the school itself. So those were the kind of things that were discussed. I think it was really generative and really important what came out of it, and it's exciting to move forward. So I don't know if you want to talk about the schedule.
I just wanted to clarify that a lot of these things the state will pay for, but not in the size in which we might want to have it. The community might want to have a stadium a little bit larger than what the state would. And I read on Facebook that said, well, I thought something else should be more important. All these things are important. It's just a matter how much support will the community support them in the size in which we might want to have. We're only going to build it once in our lifetimes, hopefully.
So yeah, you did an excellent job explaining that. So the process right now is there's a survey out, and I hope it went out to through the city push out. It's on Facebook, it's on our website. It, in all of our social media areas, we've put it out for people to take the survey. When I came into the meeting, 180 people have filled out the survey right now, and it's falling pretty much in line of what we did at the community forum. And about 47 comments. I have not read through the comments. The survey results will go to the subcommittee, which meets the first week of December, and they'll talk about the results of the survey, the results from the public forum, and then bring that to the building committee to talk through what items are going to be part of the design concept. So what we have to do is decide what is going to be paid locally, and the DOE, the Department of Education, we meet with them monthly to go over where our decision making is, what things look like. The state pays for 185 square feet per student. The enrollment that we're projecting with that is 1,180 students, so you multiply that times 185, and that's your square footage that the state contributes. There will be other things in the building probably beyond that we have to discuss and negotiate with the state around funding. These items, as David pointed out, they provide a grass field. That's what is provided for athletics, is a grass field. Not the bleachers, not the scoreboard, not the lights, not the concession stand. That's all expected to be at the local level. Many of these items have come through several forums and talking through with the community over the last year and a half. This was our third forum as we began this process. And last fall, I went through all the elementary schools asking for feedback, and the high school, middle school, on what parents were looking for. And a lot of these items are what made the list. So the subcommittee didn't just sit with the 8 people and say, what do we want? What have we been hearing in the community about what the community wants? Around the auditorium, they pay for a third of the enrollment. Beyond the third of the enrollment is the city. So they also pay for a basic stage curtain. So if we want this to be a community auditorium, we really need to think beyond the basic. We all know Auburn Lewiston does not have a strong venues for performances. So we're really looking forward to that. As we had the forum in the gymnasium, that's Edward Little's auditorium. So many of their performances do not occur at EL. They have to go off-site, whether it's the Community Little Theater or the Franco Center. So it would be nice to have that. A lot of these items too, what's important is you have to do it the first time. It will be more expensive. We have to go back and add in items later. For example, the track. There's been discussion. We have a 6-lane track, and most tracks are 8 lanes. So the time to do it is now, not later, because once you build the stadium, it would be hard to add in the track. Same with the performing arts, is if we don't build a control panel or those items that are important, like where the orchestra would be, we would have to worry about that and what we would do later. Climate control has been highly ranked as well. All of our buildings are climate controlled, so it makes sense that Edward Little would also be climate controlled. So it's nice to see the community supporting that. And geothermal has had a lot of support as well. What I've learned a lot about geothermal is it's underground. That's where the wells are, and it would support a lot of the costs with the climate control feature. So those two kind of can go hand in hand. They don't necessarily have to. So a lot of these things go hand in hand. It's hard to do one without the other. So there'll be things that we have to prioritize. We have another community forum scheduled for January 23rd. That's Wednesday evening at 6 o'clock. And whether it will be at EL or at Auburn Middle School, it depends on the basketball teams. At that time is really when the public will hear and see the design concept. Right now is a design concept where Harriman is taking all the features, everything the staff has said, the community has said, and putting it into a model. It's not down into the nitty-gritty. You won't be seeing exactly what the classrooms look like, but where would things be? Where's the cafeteria going to be? Where's the career and technical? The fire chief talked about the need for firemen. Well, that is one of the programs being looked at for Edward Little, is the fire safety program and EMT program. Rob Callahan, the director of Lewiston Regional Technical Center, his vision is to have the public safety and the manufacturing branches of the programming at Edward Little High School. That's not finalized, that all has to be worked through, but that's what we're looking at designing. There's going to be around 54,000 square feet of CTE programming scheduled for EL. The Department of Education is supporting that, which is great, but we'll need partnerships for equipment. So I'm sure Rob Callahan will be calling the chief, fire department, and saying, how can you help us with equipment needs and things like that for that program. And whether the chief knows, Edward Little is running an EMT course right now, so if he wants to give Jim Horn a call at EL and get involved, we'd love to have him. So a lot coming up. We are on a fast track to the June referendum. And to do that, it has to go through, obviously, the public hearing January 23rd. For school committee approval in February, city council approval in March, in order to be on the referendum in June. So it is a fast track, and we're going to be trying to get out all the information we can as quickly as we can so that the public is aware. That's why the price tags went out at the forum of what these item range costs would be, so people would know this is what we're looking for the high school. I think I covered what you were hoping.
That's great.
Okay.
See if there are any questions.
Any questions?
Thank you very much for the four of you for giving us that update. I appreciate that. I'm going to open up to a couple questions, if we could. Questions?
A couple, thank you. What about those folks who do not follow you on Facebook or electronically? How do they know that there's a survey out there?
Well, I did put on the postcard that went home that there would be a survey following up. So hopefully if they've read that, they're looking into it. I mean, the newspaper, I did send it out to Bonnie Washuk to publish in the newspaper also, that there's a survey link for that as well.
Do you have a paper copy? A non-electronic
We do not have
version of the
we do
survey?
not have a paper copy.
Could we recommend or maybe suggest, if we could, maybe a paper copy of the survey? We know it's very, very manually intensive, but for the very small percentage of people.
Yeah, because
that have
every time we've done paper, very few people take the paper, to be honest.
All people count. They're all
But anyone who
taxpayers.
wants one, people can call and ask, and we certainly can get them a paper copy.
That would be great. I was just thinking
Sure,
some of our
absolutely.
seniors that would be utilizing
Yeah.
community asset that
Some,
don't have internet
some people
connection.
don't read
Definitely.
the papers as well, so I mean, you've got to try to get to whomever you can, so you can hear from everyone.
Correct, yeah.
You know, not just the parents. So that was one question I had. The
We've
other
done
one is
well
what-
hearing from our senior citizens, to be honest. They've taken a good amount of part in the public forums. I've been very impressed with the amount of people who are coming out who don't have children directly in the schools. It's been wonderful.
That's great.
Do you have what is the figure for how much extra that would cost for all of these amenities that you had talked about?
I think the mayor and I talked about it was around 26 million, if you
No.
add up everything coming down the line.
To be fair, I got that
Okay.
quote from Councilor Titus, so
Oh.
if it's wrong,
Andy, do you know the exact amount?
It's 26.4 million.
There you go. See. And these are all estimates. It will depend on the design and, going out to bid. As Harriman said, it's we're doing our best to hit June so that we're first out on bidding. The later you go in the year, the more difficult the pricing.
if I could, questions that I want to wrap up with some further conversations that I've had with school administration. Councilor Titus, we'll go to Councilor Hayes.
Just real quick, I think we got to get the word out a little better. I was at that forum, and I think we only had maybe 5 or 6 or 7 citizens. And I'd like to, I hope that people are going to have a chance to really see what's going on here, because it's a fast track. And once council has got it, there's not a lot of time to go backwards and change things. And so the 23rd is going to be pivotal. And I don't know how we get the word out so we can have a lot more people, taxpayers, there and to see what's going on. Because I know it was great, you guys did great work, and I loved seeing the presentations. I think it was a great opportunity to show off the hard work they've done. But that also needs to be seen by a lot more people, because I want this to pass a referendum. And if we think we're going to, not get the word out good enough, and then hope that at the polls people will approve a 10 or 15 or $1 million bond without knowing anything about it, it's not going to pass. So I'm really hoping that we can get the word out, not just electronically, and I know the newspaper is not good, and sending notes to home is okay, but that usually gets to parents who have a vested interest. There's a lot more other taxpayers that should also know about this somehow.
Well, we did a mailing to all citizens. It wasn't to parents. As a matter of fact, right, yes. Yes,
All residents.
I think evenings are difficult for people. It was a cold evening. I wasn't surprised. You're home, you've had dinner, you have to debate whether you're going to come out. We tried, we do Facebook Live so that people could watch back the tape if they chose to watch back. We're trying to record it so people have an opportunity to see that. So any suggestions? We are looking at hiring a public, a PR firm to help support us to the referendum. So we hope to do that in the next couple of weeks to try to see all the ways we can get the message out.
One question on that referendum. It's going to be, will it be like 2 questions in June? Will it be 1 question for the state portion and another question for the local share, or will it be just 1 question?
We haven't made that decision yet.
Okay.
That decision has not been made.
Thank you, Katie.
Councilor Hayes.
Of course, this leads to some money needing to come from the community, but
Correct.
also fundraising, hopefully to get some support individually. And I guess it's good that the survey kind of puts out there the things that would add to the aesthetics and the warmth and so forth, some of which I guess maybe naming rights would entice somebody, for instance, to the community stairs, for instance. You know, not a real big item, but yet, you know, probably is going to be a lower priority, but yet would be very nice. I think same with the, well, the interior, we're talking about,
Right.
you know, some wood and the warmth that that provides. So hopefully just the survey might prompt some interest in maybe some individuals, alumni, you know, residents, coming forward to say, yes, you know, I could take on a good part of this and maybe find a few others that would come forward with an individual to take on a particular item.
Start it off. Throw it down. What's a check, Bob? Let's get the bidding
Try to
going.
decide upon which would be the most favorable.
Councilor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Katie, I know the Sun Journal does a good job of getting the word out, but not everybody gets the Sun Journal. Have you thought of talking to the Twin City Times and running some pieces in the Twin City Times, and also maybe talk to them or cut a deal with them where they may, at your cost of a printing of your survey, insert it in their paper?
Yes, we can definitely look at doing more with Twin City Times, definitely. Not
And
sure about
then-
this. Survey's 3 pages, so, but we could do something, you know, either put information in there about it.
I will say, I think
Definitely.
you bring up a great point, Councilor Gary. We have just critically talking here, we have a school department that's in charge of teaching our kids how to critically think and, you know, read.
Right.
That's great. But you're not a marketing department.
No, I'm not.
You're a school, and you're in
Correct.
administration.
Right.
I'll state for the record that this city is in, and that includes municipal and school, and I've said it before, is in dire need of an effective marketing and communication department to get the word out to people on various things. We have people that spend percentages of time doing such, but at a quick check today, I have not seen an email from the municipal side of Auburn, nor a social media post encouraging people to go to the survey. So we have left out, you know, a chunk of individuals that we have not reached, specifically people that probably don't have school-age children. So Twin City Times, newspapers, earned media, PR, all that should be and could be done effectively internally, especially in something as weighty as this. So I'll get off my
Mr. Mayor?
soapbox on this, but just think about everything that we need to communicate with our residents and how we do not do that to the best of our ability.
Can I continue just a half a second longer? Katie, you said the survey is 3 pages long. What if you took like 11 by 17 paper and put your survey on that? That could be folded. That would be as cost or more cost effective than trying to print and keep all the 3 separate pages together. Because I've seen that done, or like make like a tabloid thing that's easy to print, that your high school kids could do, to have it insert. Or I don't know what the Sun Journal would cost you for the same similar thing, but I'm sure where the Sun Journal is very civic-minded and takes great pride in getting the word out and becoming a community partner in various projects the cities on both sides of the river does, maybe they would do that for the good of our community, do something. I don't know if they could do a freebie, but give you something better for your, more value for your dollar, or no dollar, if they would run it as a public service freebie.
I think those are all great ideas. Marketing communication, a marketing communication department that would jointly service the city and the school.
And funding, correct.
Say again?
And funding. Every time we mail out, it's about $1,500, so
Yes,
yes.
yes. A comprehensive plan on communication can save money
Correct.
long-term, absolutely. They are pricing these things. So
They are.
if there's no other questions, would like to move on the agenda. I will say, if I could, talking about cost, one last thing. I did talk to the chairman of the school committee today. We are starting preliminary conversations, along with city administration, the city manager, on how we start having these conversations on affordability. And I think those can go in tandem. So we need to start earmarking or blocking out pots of money, so to speak, without designating it for specific items within the budget, but at least knowing that it's there and where we can find it. So thank you very much for your time. Look forward. It's going to be a very exciting 6 months on this. Okay, we're going to move on. That's it for communication. It's been a long night, folks. I apologize. I think next time we won't have so many important topics to communicate with. Next on the agenda, I'm going to open up to the first open session of the night. Members of the public are invited to speak to the council about any issue directly related to our city business, which is not on tonight's agenda. I would ask that you say your name and address and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Is there anybody from the public who'd like to speak? None seen? I will move on to unfinished business, which we have none of. Next is new business. We have an order to approve the 180-day extension of Ordinance 0306182018. This is in reference to the moratorium on retail marijuana. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion for Councilor Titus, a second from Councilor Hayes. I'll open up to public comment. Are there any members of the public that would like to comment on the extension of this moratorium? None being? I'll bring it back to the council. Council, any comment, debate?
I do. I have a...
Councilor Walker.
Yeah, I'm really curious of why this has taken so long. I've got people out there asking, you know, are you going to extend this another 100 days, 180 or 200, whatever? Why is this taking us so long to come up with some rules and regulations so that we can move forward and get this out there and stop making people feel like they can't do a business out there? I mean, this is...
one of the reasons, Council Walker, and I was frustrated too, I'm on that committee, but one of the first portion of the committee we were working, the state reformulated the rules twice on medical marijuana, and of course retail is another story. We're not even there yet. The state hasn't even, and we don't think they're going to vote on that till maybe 2020. So the retail side isn't going to happen until at least then. But the medical marijuana was changed several times, and they finally had a major sweeping change, probably, I'm going to say a month and a half ago, that they passed in the last legislature, that completely changed the rules. It gave us local control, some stuff that we didn't have before that we have now. So we really weren't able to get going on the ordinances yet until we saw that final draft from the state, which is done. And since then, we've been able to work on the ordinance, and we've got a rough draft that's very close to being finished. But unfortunately, that delayed us writing the ordinances. Otherwise, it would have been done a lot sooner than that. Otherwise, we would have written ordinances that would have had to have been rewritten based on what the
You're
state
saying you're almost there. Does it take 180 days to get there?
Well, this is 180 as a basic. What will happen is the ordinance will take over for the moratorium once the ordinance is passed. So we're hoping to pass the ordinance maybe in March or so, have the city council have the draft, have the ordinance to pass in March. So the ordinance would, I mean, the moratorium might go till May, but it will be stopped in March if we pass the ordinance for the use of this.
That's 120 days, that's 4 months out.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a while to get this stuff written. It's unfortunate that we got delayed, because if the state had, you know, their first draft was passed and done, we would be done also. But they wasted probably 3 months or 4
So are
months'
we
time.
rewriting the one that they've done, or are we going to accept their draft?
Well, we had to make sure that it was compliant with their rules. So when they started changing things and changing what caregivers could and couldn't do, we had to make sure that our ordinance was in keeping with that. Or we could just opt out, but we didn't want to do that. So we decided we wanted an ordinance that's going to keep pace with that, with the state regulation.
Still a long time out, 140.
I
You
agree.
can't tell me you can't put together, you know, 3 or 4 meetings and get this thing settled. This is,
It's a little more to writing an ordinances than I thought it was, that's for sure. We still got to get planning board to look at what we've got for a rough draft, and then they've got to give recommendations to make sure that it fits with what they want to do.
if the
so.
state has written an ordinance that's supposed to work for us, I don't know why it's
Well,
going to
no.
take you 6 months to get one
One of
out
the
there.
states that wasn't telling us to do was how many feet we were going to have a business from, say, a school grounds or other safety zones. We also had to make sure that how many do we want to have, and there was a certain distance between them, because we didn't want to open it up to anybody who wanted to do it on any street corner. And also decide what's the business going to look like. Do we want somebody to be able to just set up a small little business in a strip mall, or do we want to make sure this is a legitimate type business? So a lot of questions had to be answered. We actually studied Colorado and the laws that the things that they've had and the experiences they had. We had to go through that so we could understand what their pitfalls were, where they've been through it. And there's been a lot of pitfalls. In fact, a lot of people in Colorado just have wished that it never happened. So before we could write regulations and ordinances that fit Auburn, we had to do a lot of research as well. And go through, we had several surveys we did, who wanted what area, and what we wanted for distances, again, safe zones, and how they were going to be set up. So it was really a lot more to it than I thought.
So when you're all done this, we won't have any pitfalls. We'll be perfect, right?
I think so, very close.
We'll see.
Is the state done with their revisions?
Yes, they're finally done.
Okay.
Well, maybe not, Chief.
Well, they're done with the statutes that were passed. However, in this next session, I already saw some of the placeholders for some of the LDs that are going to be coming forward is to change this. So that potentially will happen, and we'll make adjustments as we go along. However, what has not come out yet are the rules and regulations. And, Councilor Titus said 2020, but, they're also projecting maybe 2021. So you really are not going to see a retail establishment for many, many years here by the time they get this taken care of. And that is completely at the state level. We will be prepared to make sure that our language of what we want for, compliance is in place.
But we've got places that are still building out right now that plan on opening. Are we going to?
And they won't be able to until the state passes theirs. They know that going in. They've met with the planning department. They've had conversations with them. They know that they're taking some risks and moving forward with their operations. We are taking all that into consideration when we're identifying how many license into what zones. We've been mapping out the zones so we can actually see how many in each area. So I think when you see the ordinance, and I have it here. We have a great draft that's already in place, for us to be working from. But I think once you'll see it, I think that puts us in a good position. We're not holding up any operation other than the medical marijuana storefronts. That's what your moratorium is on. It's on nothing else. So there are no other businesses that are saying we need to move forward. Those that want to move forward are retail, and they cannot move forward. So you're going to have some medical marijuana storefronts that still want to get in, right? We did that when we went through the process and we put the moratorium in. They still want to get in. However, the moratorium has limited them. Now, once this ordinance passed, they then will be able to come in as a medical marijuana storefront. But we are not, your moratorium did not put a stop on any recreational, any of the manufacturing, cultivation. That's all happening. It continues to happen. So when you look at your manufacturing, your cultivation sites, we currently have think we did some rough numbers, but I want to say they were close to 50 in Auburn that's currently operating. Those continue to happen. Those aren't changing. So those operations are happening, and they'll continue to do that under the medical component.
Any more discussion on this?
Just a brief comment.
Mr. Manager?
I just want to say that, I've been to some of the meetings of the working group, and they've been working with one arm tied behind their back because the process at the state level, and there are other municipalities, in fact, the vast majority of municipalities in the state that are looking at what we're doing because we are ahead of the process in many ways. So I appreciate the work that the Assistant City Manager has been doing and the other folks who have been involved in the process. And I think when this does come to the council, I think you'll be pleased with the work that's happened, and I look forward to that discussion. Thank you.
I'm going to bring it to a vote. All those in favor of Order 97-119-2018, please raise your hand. Opposed? Abstain? Vote of 6-1, the order passes. Next is an order to approve a waiver of foreclosure on the Auburn Enterprise Center. I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we table order number 98-119-2018 until our next meeting.
Second.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilor Titus to table this till our next regularly scheduled meeting. I've got a second from Councilor Lasagna. This is proper order.
No discussion on a tabling motion.
Point of clarification, Ms. Clerk. I can entertain a motion to table prior to a motion to bring this?
You can.
I can? Okay. So I've got a motion from Councilor Titus, a second from Councilor Lasagna. All those in favor of tabling this to the next regularly scheduled meeting? 4 opposed? Abstain? None. This motion is tabled by a vote of 4-3. Next is an order to reappoint, I'm going to go to several appointments here on orders.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilor Gary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Appointment Committee met on November 13, 2018 to review applications and have made our recommended nomination for these boards and committees of the city as follows. On Order 99-119-2018, reappointment of Chris Bouchard to the Community Development Block Grant CDBG Loan Committee with a term expiration of 10/1/2001. On Order 100-1119-2018, appointing Clifton Grime, Rick Malonsky, David Gagne, Robert Stone, Fatuma Hassan, Mary Sylvester, Emily Innes, Adam Lee, Joni Reedman, Stephen Gilbert, Stephen Milks, and Jan Phillips to the Strategic Plan Committee. On Order 101-1119-2018, appointing Robert Stone, or did I do it again? Or did I miss up? Okay. Appointing Robert Stone, Joni Reedman, Sid Hazelton, Lena Han, Robert Boyer, Betsy Libby, Paul Leclerc, Jeanette August, Brendan Fontaine, Scott Berry, Manuel Salgado, and Shelley Kruzinski to the Strategic Plan Investment Subcommittee. On Order 102-111-92018, appointing Rick Malonsky, Thomas Platt, Darcy Boldrin, Scott Shanneman, Jessica Donovan, Rebecca Swanson Conrad, Joan McCrae, Sid Hazelton, Brian Carrier, Richard Landman, Ryan Walker, Dana Staples, Mamie Nye, Olga Dolskir, Adam Boss, John Plord, and William Sylvester to the Strategic Plan Growth Subcommittee. On Order 103-111-92018, appointing David Gagne, Philip Salviano, James Palaskas, Stephen Wallace, Rachel DeGrozier, Katie Boss, Maureen Obie, Kirsten Muzinski, thank you, Stephen Mattelli, William Saucier, Rick Martell, Misty Edgecombe, Tijan Albuca, thank you, Sharon Bennett, Janice Barrett, Suzanne Sullivan, and John Cleveland to the Strategic Plan Quality Subcommittee.
Seconded to all of that.
You have to repeat that, Councilor Hayes? Thank you very much, Councilor Gary, for doing that. I've got a motion for Councilor Gary on the floor, a second from Councilor Hayes. I'll open up the public for comment. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak upon these appointments? None being? I'll bring it back to the council. Is there any debate on these appointments, individually or as a whole?
I apologize for mispronouncing some of their names.
I think you're batting about 85%. It's good enough for most. I think you're good. Thank you. Any other debate? No? None being? By a show of hands, all those in favor of accepting these applications? Opposed? Abstained? None being? The orders pass 7-0. We're going to go on to reports. Okay. Several reports. I'm going to start off with, it's been 2 weeks since we met last. Veterans Day, November 11th. I will say that I went to 2 different events in, actually, Lewiston. Friday was a great, huge Veterans Day turnout for the Auburn Exchange Club. I want to give them extremely well-deserved thank you for putting on an amazing luncheon at the Green Ladle for our veterans. We had well over 200 veterans and their spouses in attendance, so much so that we actually had to turn people away at the door, which was a shame, but it also shows how popular that program is. The students of the Green Ladle, some of which are from Auburn, did yet again a phenomenal job preparing the food, and it was greatly appreciated. At that luncheon, I did speak, and I presented a key to the city to Colonel Todd DeGrozier, a U.S. Marine Corps retired, who's also the chairman or CEO of Healing Waters, which is an adaptive fly fishing program based out of Maryland. You probably know his parents, Ed and Sheila DeGrozier. Todd grew up here along with his 3 siblings, and really just a great example of growing up in Auburn, getting out there and doing great things for himself, his community, and his country. Sunday, I attended the past review with the LA Veterans Council. It was nicely attended. Publicity is key. There's a lot of our veterans that didn't know about this annual event, myself included. Before I became mayor, I had no idea it existed. This is another one of those examples of communications and helping our local groups really get the word out so they can honor all members of our community. So other than that, we've had some great meetings with the Agriculture Subcommittee. I'm proud to announce that we've all agreed on the definition of farmer and farm. Extremely important milestones for that committee. We also agreed to start work at the staff level on drafting ordinance, official legalese ordinance, to review during our next meeting, which will be next Thursday. I believe that's the 28th. It will be held at 5:30 here in either council chambers or the community room. I invite everyone to participate, and there will be probably discussion on those ordinances, and there may be a vote, and there's always opportunity for the public to comment and give their recommendations and suggestions. But I do believe that we are on track, and we'll have some final ordinances to Planning Board and Conservation by late December, early January, and the City Council for review after we review this with the community at large, probably in February, March at the latest. So those are my updates. It's been a good process. And if I don't get a chance to say it, happy Thanksgiving to everybody, and a special thanks to all the people in the community who have volunteered their time, effort to contribute Thanksgiving baskets and other goods to people who are less fortunate and couldn't afford them on their own. Namely, I believe the city of Auburn and staff contributed over 8 baskets of some sort. I heard the rumor today in the kitchen as they were counting butter. And that was really, really good. And I know that made everybody happy, staff-wise, to do so. So thank you very much for all your effort here and outside of this office. Councilors, start to the right. Councilor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have a great event put on by our age-friendly committee come this Thursday. We're doing a community Thanksgiving at the Senior Center starting at 12 noon going to 2. We had seating for about 100, and we're just about there. We're going to have a dinner that will rival anybody's home dinner. We've got several types of vegetables, and we'll have turkey as the highlight of the day with gravy, stuffing, and we're going to have various home-cooked desserts. And it's going to be a great day, and I'm looking forward to being there and helping serve it. And the good Council Walker, he's been working very hard as well to run around and help get donations. And I'm not a shopper, and he was Mr. Shopper. He got a lot of the stuff on our grocery list for the event, as well as we've had a few businesses and individuals kindly donate to our cause. And I too want to thank everybody in the community.
Councilor Lasagna.
Thank you. You heard the updates from the school committee, the new building committee, and also from the Citizens Advisory Committee. Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. is going to be the first meeting of the Strategic Planning Committee. And I'm looking forward to it. And I want to say that the process for getting members of the subcommittee has been a really great process. I'm looking at the names on there, and there are so many names of people who might not have been involved in any kind of city work or civic work before, but this is an exciting way for them to get involved, and we can develop them so that they can become city councilors one day. So thank you for that process. Really well done.
Councilor Hayes.
I mentioned the ski swap, which did occur a couple weeks ago, was successful. I think there's excitement to get on the slopes. I was out to Lost Valley on Saturday. They've started to make snow. They're doing some interior renovations, and I think in a lot of the changes being made, it's being made for skiers and boarders and tubing, but also for any ones that want to just come out and to view the excitement on the slopes. So looks like a good season ahead.
Knock on wood. Councilor Titus.
No report tonight.
Councilor Fournier.
Wait a minute, I'm in shock. Wait a minute. I almost forgot what I was going to say. Wow, just really quick.
Very good. Councilor Walker.
Really quickly, tomorrow, I don't have anything to report regarding the school because you folks did a good job regarding that. I also would like to mention that tomorrow morning, the Library Board of Trustees will be meeting. It would be a long meeting. We've got a lot to take care of, but we'll report that at the next time. And Councilor Walker and I attended a veterans event that was extremely well done, and it was at the Park Avenue School, and it was on Wednesday the 14th. And I had to double check it because I thought I missed it, but it was at 8:30 in the morning. Those students and the teachers and the principal, those who prepared them, did a fabulous, fabulous job. I was blown away, and there were a number of veterans there. I had requested the superintendent a while back, asked her, are we doing this with all of the schools? And she didn't seem to know if they were doing it or not, but I know the high school used to do it. So I'm personally going to speak with each principal and ask if they would consider doing that, undertaking some sort of an event to commemorate Veterans Day, because there are veterans everywhere. But I was so proud of the Park Avenue students. They just did a fabulous job, and even came and gave us little, you don't have the papers up, you're supposed to have, we had some, they gave us papers, thank you for your service. You know, they didn't know which one of us were service people and which one of us were council people, but, and we had little flags that they gave us as well. So they did an awesome job, and it warmed my heart to see them fully understand what this concept is all about.
Very good. Very good. Councilor Walker.
Thank you. Once again, like Belinda Gary said, we're going to be down at the Senior Center Thanksgiving Day. We'll be there 12 to 2, and if you have no place to go and you want something to eat, definitely show up. We will serve you, whether you're 10 years old or 100 years old. So come on down and enjoy it with us. We'll have plenty of turkey. I've got some real good cooks preparing the turkeys, and they'll be there on time. So come on down and eat with us and have some fun for that day. And we did a little decorations too in the building, so it'll cheer your heart, I'm sure. And again, Park Avenue, they did a great job for the veterans and the the young little boys and little girls that were there. The parts that they had to do to warm the hearts of veterans. We listened to the veterans get up there and speak, and some of them were, as always, the tears were coming down a little bit, and really surprised. Some have never been greeted by young, and this was just a great thing, and I'm hoping the school department will grow with this with some of the other schools. And I did attend the high school a few times in the past. They used to do it. I'm hoping they see us tonight announcing this and maybe take it up on themselves to do it again. We have 2 meetings coming up. The 27th of this month, we will be at Rowley's Diner. The United New Auburn Association, 6 o'clock. We have invited Mike Chamans and I believe Eric Cousins to speak that evening. And then we have moved the Neighborhood Watch to November 29th, which is Thursday night, 6:30, 6th Street Congregational Church. It will not be on the 22nd, that is Thanksgiving Day, so we've moved it to the 29th. So please show up at the church, 6:30. We will be there waiting for you. Thank you, and happy Thanksgiving.
Councilor Young.
Thank you. I didn't announce this 2 weeks ago because I didn't really realize who Faye Gagnon was. But I'd like to announce it now. She was formerly from Auburn, and she was a teacher, and I believe she taught at Edward Little. And now she's living out of state, but she was inducted into the Maine Running Hall of Fame. And there were 7 people inducted. She was the only female to receive the honor this year, and they do it every 2 years. And it's maybe some of you people remember her when she taught at Edward Little High School. I believe I'm correct on that. But I asked a few people, and they didn't know, they didn't remember her. But I think she was involved in the Androscoggin Harriers, and it's, according to the speech that they gave, they said she was a teacher who influenced her students. So it's a great honor, and I was glad to be there, and I do have a video of her speech and her introduction. It's on YouTube. If you want to check it out, it's Maine Running on YouTube. That's all I have to report at this time.
Very good. Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of comments. First, I appreciate what Councilor Lasagna was saying about the strategic plan process. I want to mention I really value and appreciate very much the work that Assistant City Manager has been doing on that since he became Assistant City Manager in August. I can't believe that that much time has gone by since then. Along with Liz Allen, who is our Accreditation Communications Manager, and Rachel who's our intern, and also Emily Innes, who's from Harriman. Those folks have played a key role, and there are lots of other people that will, over the next few months, help us with this process. There are over 50 people from the community that are going to be participating. I look forward to it. The other thing I want to do, there's some folks sitting in the background there, and they're here to support the new police chief, who has a swearing-in ceremony tomorrow. That's most of your command team, I think, Chief Moen, and I just would like to give you an opportunity to make some comments tonight. I know we have the swearing-in ceremony tomorrow afternoon. You've been the interim chief since August, and I've been very impressed and pleased with what you've done and the interactions I've had with you, and just ask if you would come forward and give you a round of applause.
And that's my cue as the lights go out.
And the lights come back on.
Mayor and Council, first of all, I'd like to recognize the staff that's here with me tonight. It's mostly on the command staff of the department. We have Lieutenant Tim Kuhl, Lieutenant Tony Harrington, Lieutenant Barry Schmeeks, and our executive assistant, Rita Beaudry. And Rita's the real boss that keeps us all out of jail.
That's what I've heard.
Mayor and Council, it's an honor to have been selected as your police chief for the city of Auburn. It's a challenge that I'm ready for, and I look forward to working with each of you as we continue to make Auburn the best place to live, work, and play. I've been asked, what is my vision for the agency? And honor, excellence, loyalty, and professionalism are the four cornerstones that Auburn Police Department has been built on. Expect excellence is not merely a slogan that you see on the back of our cruisers. It's the standard that we hold ourselves accountable to as we deliver the best law enforcement service to our citizens. Society is ever-changing on a daily basis. We need to be agile as we respond to these changes. The quality of life remains a high priority for the Auburn Police Department. A good quality of life leads to a vibrant community. We as a department need to be quick to address those broken windows that lead to blight and downturn for a neighborhood if left unattended. We will continue to invest in our city's youth. Our staff are fully engaged with our youth on a daily basis. Our school resource officers work diligently to ensure our kids have a safe place to gain their education. Daily, our SROs are interacting with our kids, building relationships. Our PAL Center is a safe haven that sees over 100 kids a day after school, providing them with activities and assistance with homework that they may not otherwise get once they get home. Internally, we are going to focus on the 3 T's: teamwork, talent, and technology. Teamwork amongst ourselves, other city departments, our local, state, and federal partners for continued success in maintaining a good quality of life for Auburn. Talent. Recruitment and retention is an absolute priority for me. Retention of our talent is going to be crucial as we move forward. We need to ensure that our staff is properly equipped and properly trained to carry out our mission. Police work has changed immensely, even in the last 5 years. Officer wellness will be at the forefront of our operations. The physical and mental demands of our police officers are taxed daily. We will work together to ensure that they have everything they need to maximize their delivery of service and to go home safe at the end of their shift. Recruitment is a constant and never-shifting challenge in today's world. We will need to work together to ensure that the Auburn Police Department remains one of the best departments in the state, drawing the cream of the crop for recruits. And technology will continue to be one of our largest components of our operations. In order to maximize our resources and efficiencies, we must lean on technology. Data-driven policing and criminal analysis are going to be key components in our continued mission. Accountability, consistency, and transparency are my personal cornerstones of management philosophy. Of course, we must be held accountable to the public for whom we protect and serve on a daily basis. We must also hold ourselves responsible to properly address community concerns when they arise. When our staff knows what is expected of them and the department's mission and vision is clear, accountability is more easily achieved by all. We'll need to be consistent in our delivery of law enforcement services. Our citizens expect excellence. It's that simple. We must strive to get it right every time and learn from the mistakes we make when we don't get it right. The mission should be clear and concise, and when that happens, everyone is on the same page, which makes our jobs a lot easier to accomplish. Public trust affects each and every one of us, from myself to the newest recruit. Public trust and confidence in a police department can make our jobs a whole lot easier. Equally, a lack of public trust and confidence has the potential to turn our jobs into a nightmare. Being an open book or a transparent organization will assist us in maintaining the public's trust. You've heard me reference our mission several times tonight. The mission of the Auburn Police Department is to prevent crime and protect our community. Our vision is to be community-focused in all that we do. And I look forward to working alongside the men and women of the Auburn Police Department, ensuring that Auburn remains a community where people will want to live, work, and play. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Congratulations, Chief.
Thank you.
I will say that, I'm sure you probably are, very, very proud and yet terrified.
I am.
But you have
all at the same time.
2 out of 4, 50% of your command staff are class of '92, Embry-Little graduates. And
I'm not
as
going to
a
hold
fellow
that against them.
class of '92, Embry-Little graduate, I think you're going to be fine.
I think I'm in good hands.
You're in great hands.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief. Good luck tomorrow. That's at 3:30 again.
3:30. Yes.
3:30 here.
Hey, Chief, can you have your people stand up, please? I want to give them a hand.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Team. We have a
Okay.
good team there.
Thank you. We're going to be moving on now to the Finance Director, Jill Eastman. October 2018, monthly financial report.
I'm going to be brief.
Are we going to make payroll?
Yes.
Great.
We'll make payroll.
Next.
I would be glad to answer any questions. I think I've gone over the status of where we are today in my letter, and I'm not going to read it for you. But if you have questions that weren't answered, I'd be glad to try to answer them for you.
Absolutely. I will turn it over. Councilors, any questions? Councilor Titus?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple, Jill. One of them was, I noticed in the sale of property, there's an entry. Have we actually sold some property this fiscal year? I see it's like $4,588, so it didn't look like a lot, but looks like there's some activity. Maybe there's more than that that's going to go into that area, or?
Yes, there is. Actually, we have sold one or two small pieces. We have 5. We had gone out to bid on 5 pieces of property.
Mm-hmm.
We had got bids on all of them. I finished doing all the paperwork, getting that all ready last week, and so within the next week or so, we're going to have all the closings on those. So we got, there was only one property that we had 2 bids on, but the rest of them, there was 1 bid each. And so we will be getting rid of 2 properties on Washington Street, one on the north side and one on the south side. 12 Patton, 10 Louise, and what was the other one was 73 Paul. So those are all we got.
Those will go on the tax rolls.
They will.
I mean, that's really great. I mean, one of the things I like to do is just make sure that people understand that that's what's going forward. We'll be doing more of this, and I think we'll have more interest as more properties go out to bid. The people can expect it.
Yeah, we did have a meeting of our tax acquired property committee last week, I believe it was, and we have some more that will be coming to you soon. We're just pulling all that data together for you, and there'll be more that will be coming.
Very good. The other question I had was relating to EMS transport. Looks like we're a little bit ahead of the same time period last year. Now, we heard a little bit of report about the demographics and all that of what's going on. Do you see anything changing as far as,
Bob and I, we talked about that, and we're going to just keep an eye on it because of the more Medicare and Medicaid patients we have, the less we actually collect. So we just need to kind of watch that. That's why in the report you get all of those. You get how many Medicare runs
Right.
there are, and so we're keeping all that data. So I think we just, right now, need to keep our eyes open and watch it, which I'm sure Bob will do.
Now, the relationship between new charges for October and what was actually put in that's a year-to-date number that's in that.
Yes.
Yeah, so, well, like we're showing like 202,000 in new charges. What, again, I guess I want to just make sure I clarify, we're not putting it into the financial report until we actually receive the money. It's not booked. It may
Right.
be booked, but we haven't received the payment yet.
Right.
But then there's still going to be some write-offs on money that we've received, or?
We're writing off each month now.
Yeah.
And so we're keeping, I mean, our accounts receivable stays pretty steady, the total. And we actually have started working with collection agencies, so we may start seeing some payments coming in on those ones that we were writing off.
The older ones, okay.
Because we can still go after them, even though we're writing them off. But
Okay. And then the last question, this is maybe something that you can get me some information later on, but I was looking at some of the special revenue accounts, and maybe it would be welcome to have maybe a workshop on how all that works sometimes, because like I'm looking at one of them that's Homeland Security that looks like it's in the red, but there were still expenditures that put it deeper in the red, and how those, and I know there's a way that formula works.
a lot of those are grants, and we have to spend the money first and then get reimbursed after.
So after we spent the money, it shows in the red, and then we get reimbursed after we spend the money. Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. That's all I have for questions.
Very good. Is there any other counselors, any other questions on the finances? None? None being? Very good. Thank you very much. Ms. Eastman, appreciate that. We're going to be moving on the agenda now.
You have to approve the...
Oh, we have to, I'm sorry. I'll entertain a motion to accept and place on file the October 2018 monthly report.
So moved.
Second?
And a motion from Councilor Fournier and a second from Councilor Lasagna. All those in favor by show of hands? Oppose? Abstain? None being? The report is accepted by a vote of 7-0. No, I'm sorry, 6-0 with Councilor Gary not present. Open session, this is our second one of the night. All members of the public are invited to speak about topics that do not appear on tonight's agenda. I'd ask you to state your name and limit your conversation to 3 minutes. Nobody from the public would like to speak, so I'm going to close the open session. There is no executive session for tonight, so at this point, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilor Fournier and a second from Councilor Walker. Any debate on whether or not to adjourn? Any conversation?
Oh,
Should we
no,
discuss
no,
this?
no, no, no.
Anybody from the public?
No
No?
question. Pretty clear. black
By
and white.
voice vote, all those in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? We're adjourned.